I've decided to keep a journal.
Hey everybody, welcome to Pauldcasty For Me, the podcast about film, culture, politics, and Paul Schrader, where we watch every film written and or directed by American filmmaker Paul Schrader and explore how they speak to their moment. And this one, the show's hosted by two guys who have found another form of prayer. I'm one of the guys. My name is Jake Serwin.
I'm one of the guys. My name is Ian Ryan. This is the episode from the intro from just earlier.
This is the episode from the intro. I'm so excited about my new form of prayer. It's Bomb Fest.
Yeah.
I'm excited because I'm not sure
that
who's editing
new.
this.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, it's you.
Cool.
So I'm just going to give you so many things to bleep out and also to look up if you have to bleep them out.
Yeah, I'm going to be, what's the opposite of judicious? I'm going to be not bleeping out as much as I can here for the sake of the world. That's going to be my goal.
Yeah. Remember when you got mad at me for saying that Taylor Swift should be guillotined for her plane? Her plane use? Not just her.
You have caught me in a moment where I am much more on your side than my own previous side in this instance.
Let's bring our guests in here.
Let's do it.
Gotta get them in here. We gotta get going here. Real quick, patreon.com/podcasty for me. You can pay for more of this. It's not this. It's different stuff. It's new stuff to you if you're not paying for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's $5. Patreon.com/podcasty for me. What in the face of all that's happening? What's $5? You know? What are you going to retire? Our guests today are the hosts of the great podcast Hit Factory, as well as the first and second tallest people in the state of California. Welcome back to the show, Aaron and Carlee. How you guys doing?
Hello, my friends.
Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for having us back.
I feel like Michael today.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do.
I mean, I got to tell you something about me. This is it's like remember the Hulk? Remember when the Hulk said it?
I'm always Michael.
That's the thing about me. I'm always Michael.
Yeah. That's
it's nice that you knew exactly where he was going with the joke, Ian, before any of us did.
Yeah.
That's Ian's specialty.
His superpower.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm walking in on Jake in the church and I'm giving him a big thumbs up to whichever plan he's going with. I'm not trying to talk him out of it or give him a big kiss. I'm just saying, you got this, buddy.
Wait, Jake, does it have a collar
up all the communion wafers
with it?
Yeah, it does.
Or did you add it?
It's like we should say, for the listener, I'm wearing a little costume. I'm wearing I got a priest's dickie. I think this might actually be like Vow of Poverty priced real priest dickie.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa. Okay.
It's got the collar.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm also wearing some faked barbed wire, which I've tied around myself. Famous podcast girlfriend helped me tie it. It feels pretty good. I'm going to be honest with you. To just have something wrapped around me.
Well, it's, it takes you back to the womb. You're sort of in like swaddling right now, and you feel enmeshed.
Watch it.
What?
I did try to hang myself with my umbilical cord in there.
You got it early. Yeah, smart.
Yeah. And I had a little slice of lemon for when I was starting to lose consciousness. That's a joke for all the David Carradine heads out there. We should get into we're talking about First Reformed today. That's why we all have black rings around our eyes and we're staring straight ahead.
Yes.
And also why there's we should leave long pauses in between the stuff that we say on the show.
Yep.
Like transcendental podcasting. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. And I'm also already upset. Let's do the two questions. Should we do the two questions?
Let's do it.
This is our famous podcast segment, the two questions, where we ask one another two questions in order to begin the show. Aaron and Carlee, do you have two questions for us today?
Yes, I'll start. Have you ever had a crush on someone or loved someone whose spouse you wanted to die?
That's a really good Carlee question, by the way.
I mean...
Or life partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. They don't have to be married.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's most of teenage crushdom, for me at least, and into college a little bit. And then also, any kind of a leave you for somebody else situation. You're now like, well, that guy should get hit by a small plane,
Yeah. Teenage crush. Name one of them.
teenage crush. Their names are, well, I guess I had a crush on my high school girlfriend, Beth, before we dated.
Did she have a boyfriend that you wanted to get hit by a bus?
Did you kill the boyfriend, by the way?
No, he like moved.
Okay.
So, which is a type of death.
That is a type of death, especially in like middle school. Yeah.
He was one of those guys who like, you ever see the Werner Herzog documentary about the guys on death row and how they all look like they're literally like in shadow no matter where they are? He had that kind of a face.
Got it. What's that one called? Into the Abyss, or what's it called?
Into the Abyss, yeah. And it ends with like he found like a real world No Country for Old Men monologue to end the movie on. There's like a death row prison guard is talking about some birds he saw or something, and then it cuts to black. Incredible.
Quite the filmmaker.
Hell of a guy. What about you, Ian? You ever have one of these? You ever have a crush on anybody? You ever feel anything before?
Yeah, I have. That may have come to an end recently, but I historically have had human emotions. Yeah. The only one that really comes to mind, I had a big crush on my 8th grade. We called them core teachers. The ones that teach you language arts, social studies.
Maths Pilates.
Yeah. I was in a special program. Yeah.
That was his name. Yeah. Okay.
No, this was I feel bad for her now as a teacher myself, because it wasn't just me who had a crush on her. It was like probably half the boys in the class, plus maybe a few girls with, nascent desires.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think having one kid in your class who has a little crush on you, that's cute. Facing down like 30% of the population who is only thinking about being in love with you, that seems miserable. So shout out to Miss Hutzel. I assume people won't be able to hunt her down just with that information. Maybe they will.
Hutzel with a T or a D? Hutzel.
I'm going to leave that part ambiguous just to, smear the tracks a little bit. But we figured out from a check that we fished out of her trash can.
Stop.
Whoa.
Damn.
This guy went Watergate on his crush.
Yeah, we did. I wasn't alone though, so in case that makes it better, I don't know. But we realized that she had some type of a man in her life, and we basically harangued her during class hours until she admitted that she had a fiance, and then we were all sort of like sworn in what are those things called where you all agree, like whoever dies, that person ends up with the money?
Like a pact?
Like a blood pact or something?
Right. Like I think it's like, it comes from like World War II. You and your squadron buddies, you like pool money. I think maybe it's called a tonk or something. I don't know, whatever. But it was kind of like that, but for whomever of us. Okay.
They were using them a lot back then. Not as much anymore.
That's right. Yeah, whichever of us made it, the rest of them would support that person in death, as they presumably got married to Miss Hutzel.
I mean, this is not related. I didn't have a crush on this person. But while we're talking about high school teachers' partners, I was just remembering this the other day. There was this very strong rumor in my high school that that one of the teachers' husbands was the guy in the photo pointing the gun at Elian Gonzalez. And it's like, this is a DC area high school. This is like totally possible.
Yeah.
I think it was confirmed that he was involved in the operation, but really the question was whether he's the guy. He's the guy.
He was
way less crazy
in the operation
than I anticipated. Yeah. How was that confirmed?
I think they got the teacher to like say, he was in the squad or whatever.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, SEAL Team Junior. So I don't remember who the teacher was though. I'm sure she was very lovely, worthy of crush. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, that's the power of school thinking. That's it's like a wave, unstoppable, incredible.
I do feel like having a crush on a teacher in like middle school and or high school, and maybe sometimes elementary school, is like, that's a rite of passage. If that didn't happen to you, I feel like, I don't know, you maybe went to a school where like everyone was just like an old dinosaur and ugly, or you weren't like curious about your feelings and yourself.
You weren't pushing yourself. Yeah, you were really applying your
exactly
really
new emotions.
Like, did you want to be in the GATE program? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Exactly. I would like to be in the GATE program that is storming the gates of some of these corporations.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They can't stop us all.
Yeah.
Where's the energy of those fucking Reddit idiots who are going to Naruto run into Area 51 for Exxon?
They don't
It's-
care about
it's
anything important.
Non-existent.
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't, but there was those people who in Germany who like stormed a new Tesla factory
that video
or something.
is so fucking
That's
cool.
like the
Rocks.
same thing, right?
It rocks.
all those like black bandana folks like holding hands running at the factory.
Yeah.
That rips.
Beautiful.
Aaron
our
Carlee,
guests need to tell us about their
any crush?
Murderous crushes.
Murderous crush.
I've got two, actually.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
For the sake of anonymity, I won't use a last name, even though the first one is also a teacher. But I will.
Okay.
We're not gonna
First name Miss.
dissect this on the show, but coincidentally, both of these women were named Nora, which also coincidentally happens to be my mother's name.
Yep.
We're not gonna psychoanalyze this on the show, but
No.
there was
We don't need to.
Anyway, there was
Self-evident.
yeah.
That's so
Anyway,
crazy.
Freud is the biggest erection ever right now from his grave. Anyway,
Do you know that he just had a hot stepmom? Do you know
That
this?
makes
His
sense.
father married a woman who was like 6 years older than him when he was like 12. That's the whole thing.
got it. Okay.
Wow.
I've
Really
seen that.
Is that
self-image
really the
story.
whole thing?
Actually,
Yeah.
Yeah, open and shut.
saw that video on the
And
internet.
shut. Yeah.
Anyway, okay. So first, Nora was a student teacher. My senior year of high school.
Student teachers will get
Aren't they
you.
all?
Yeah.
Yeah, student teacher.
Student
Come on.
teacher.
Okay, yeah.
So, and this is the thing about it.
that's
It was
primed.
my senior year. It was my last semester. I'm 18 years old. She's at most 22. So it's like a thing that's like, obviously you probably see me as a child, but like it's not out of the realm of possibility if we keep in touch for years after this, right? Anyway, she was student teaching for effectively like our version of like a home ec class, though. Like it was just like
Not real.
no, it was
Right.
it was a fake class, but
She asked for one person to be volunteered to be dad that
yes,
day.
exactly.
Yeah, here's how to administer a back rub.
My good friend Nick Malone and I, shout out to Nick, both took this class together as a total blow-off class as an elective for our senior year. And as you can imagine, the content of the actual course was extremely rudimentary. So we would finish assignments very quickly. We would just like, boom, boom, boom. And then we would promptly spend like the remaining 45 minutes of the class just like flirting with this student teacher. She had a boyfriend who was, as I understand, in basic training. I can't remember if he was in the Army or in the Marines, but he
Wow.
was in one branch of the
That's
military.
tough,
And this, mind you, was in 2008. So not only, is there a thing where it's like, I wish you were dead, but like, there's also a strong likelihood that you could be somewhere like in a country in the Middle East in the next couple of years. I actually found out, it's funny, very near the end of our semester, after she had already completed sort of the student teaching requirements for the class, our actual teacher for that course informed me and Nick one day, because we were asking about her and inquiring where she was because she didn't show up for like the last couple days, that she had been granted some time off because I guess she was supposed to fly out to like Virginia or something and go to some big event with her boyfriend who was like,
Yeah, she's got to go to Clarksville to get knocked up.
exactly. And he had broken up with her.
Whoa.
But
Wow, she needed you so much in
she
that
needed
moment.
me in that moment. Anyway, we never saw each other after that. She didn't ever come back to school. I graduated. I went on with the rest of my
Wow.
life, and that was that. So who knows where she is now?
And then you had to put up with your dowdy old real teacher, Miss Busty St. Clair.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yep.
I hate this. I hate this one.
That's correct, Jake. You nailed it.
So that's
Fast
Nora
forward-
1. Yeah. Okay.
That's Nora,
Nora
one.
one.
And sorry to go on at length about this. I know
No,
I'm
it's
dragging
okay.
her.
We
Anyway,
don't have that much
My
time.
fault. I ask really good questions.
It's a very good question. Nora, too, was somebody I met when I first moved out here to San Francisco. I was bartending at kind of a high volume but upscale joint on like the fringe of the Tenderloin here in San Francisco, for those familiar with the geography. And we got a very like hip young clientele. And this group of girls came in, and she was particularly attentive. I noticed one night we were kind of flirting, and then that was that. Well, the following week, I attend the famous Folsom Street Fair with some friends.
Of erotic fair.
You're
wearing your leathers.
That's right. I'm wearing next to nothing save for my, leather vest and chains
and the leather dog mask.
Yeah, exactly. And walking around my buddy on all fours in his gimp costume, as one does.
Yeah.
No, I was pretty conservatively dressed, and it's fun just to attend and observe the sights.
I so see you there in a button-down shirt and a tie.
I was thinking one of those. I was thinking one of those J. Crew dresses that Michelle Obama would wear. But
pretty sure I was just in jeans and a t-shirt that day.
Yeah.
Anyway,
All right.
Festivities are winding down. We've been hanging out. We've been drinking all day, and lo and behold, we bump into this group of girls who had been at the bar the week before. We go out with them for the night. There's more flirting. And then she just becomes a regular at the bar. I find out that she is married to a man who lives in Canada. The reasons...
modeling
Not
up there?
real.
The reason...
Working for Nintendo?
Exactly.
Working as a model for Nintendo up there?
The reason specifically for their distance or whatever is not well defined, or at least I've forgotten it at this point. It was always kind of... She seemed reluctant to even bring him up. I'll say that much in our conversations.
So a boyfriend in Canada.
Yeah.
He's ostensibly non-existent.
He's non-existent at this point. Anyway, there were a handful of occasions where late nights, as I was closing down the bar, she would be inquiring about whether or not I would like to come and pay her a visit at her apartment. We hung out a couple more times after that, mostly with a friend group. And I never did anything because I felt bad about it, and because my other bartenders and coworker friends made me feel some shame about even letting it get to the point that it was at. And in retrospect, affair. I should have just been nah, fuck you guys, because anyway, never materialized into anything. Also moved away. I have not heard from this person now in over a decade. But that was another person where I was you're married, and it would be awesome if your husband was the victim of some quick death, but
some type
still
of
a death.
timber accident, whatever happened.
Exactly, right. Felling a tree out in the wilderness of Nova Scotia,
or one of those things where a house just explodes for no reason.
I
you wouldn't care.
I was
only
reading
one person is harmed.
Isolated house.
Was reading a book recently about early 20th century America, and some guy who's doing a lot of work in logging and railroads and whatnot. And they mentioned that many a lumberjack are felled by stray branches that just happen to break, gain some weight and come down on top of them and just nick them on the side of the head, and then they're gone. So if that was the case, that would have been cool.
Right.
You know what they call those stray branches sometimes? They call them widowmakers.
That's...
So
that's very true.
Joking.
They do call them widowmakers.
Yeah.
Do they letter them? And they letter the trees and they number each branch. So one of them could be K19.
K19, the widowmaker. There you go. Very good, Jake. Those are my Nora
Thank
sagas.
You.
Carlee, what's your story of wanting a spouse to die?
Oh, I mean, so many. I think I'll just say, for consistency's sake, there was a teacher in high school. We didn't figure out that he had a girlfriend until after the fact, and then the thing that we discovered is rather scandalous. Actually, not really, but it was just oh, okay, so maybe you would have dated one of us.
Yeah, cool. So I had a chance.
Interesting.
I mean, it was one of those. Yeah. So that's my answer. And also just I was going to say Keanu Reeves, but he's so happy and they're so good. I want him to be really happy.
Yeah,
it's nice.
I don't want her to die.
Yeah.
His pregnant girlfriend did die. So
oh my God,
true.
that's right. Yeah. So no,
he has suffered many a
where
loss.
Were you
in his life?
Give us your
location. I was in third grade or something, but not entirely out of the realm of possibility of what it was capable of back then.
That's true.
I should say, and I wonder if Aaron and Ian relate to this at all, but my famous podcast girlfriend, her boyfriend, I often think about killing as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
Try to push those thoughts from the mind. Thank you for the question, Carlee. We need one more. Aaron, do you have one?
Yeah, I'll ask one. It's going to be a very topical one. We'll make it very quick. let's say that Ernst Toller, the Reverend of First Reformed Church.
Did they not say his name until the very end when she says it?
We'll find out.
I think
She
that's
says
right.
Ernst.
I think it's just
Yep.
Reverend Toller.
Mhm.
Anyway, if Ernst Toller of First Reformed was a real guy and you were witness to his slow radicalization and his awakening to climate justice and the activist movement around it, what revolutionary film would you recommend he watch in order to send him further down the rabbit hole?
Good question.
I think you'd probably get a real kick out of like Winter Light.
Yeah, you might like that.
Interesting,
That's
yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
I mean, my go-to to fire people up is of course the Battle of
Of course.
Algiers.
Mhm.
Or there's a fantastic Canadian documentary called Kanesatake 270 years of resistance. It's a film about land preservation activism by some, I believe they're Mohawk people in Canada. Kanesatake 270 years of resistance. Don't want to rob the folks of any
Deny them. Yeah, sure.
any of their years of resistance. Yeah, it's Mohawk people in what is called Quebec who were occupying and resisting the transformation of a sacred burial ground into a fucking golf course. It's called the Oka Crisis in 1990. And this film will get you filling bottles with vodka and rags. It's a real, that'll charge
That
you up.
sounds
So I
right.
would say that one. And that I believe is free on the Film Board of Canada website. So
okay.
go watch it. Go watch the film.
Good
and get
pick.
pissed off.
Ian?
Ian?
Yeah. I mean, that's excellent. Documentaries? Can't think of any like immediate easy ones to put Teflon on the slide for our friend Toller to get him, just moving faster in the direction we wanted to go. But I guess Active Killing is the one that for me I watched and was sort of like, oh, the scale of the bad stuff we've done is so much bigger than I realized. Because by the time I saw it, I was certainly well informed about the types of things we've been involved in globally. But to see that it was like a question of hundreds of thousands or millions that we're talking about were directly affected by U.S. policy. That was certainly an eye-opening one for me. Fiction-wise, Princess Mononoke, maybe.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a
I
good
love
one.
that answer.
Just to say like, well, there's no wrong. I mean, even if
Yeah.
you think humans are good, it's still just going to be such a bleak future. Even if you want to protect the people and maybe not go full violent activists, somebody's gonna die. The great spirit of the forest is not long for the future.
That's a good answer, Ian.
That's such a good answer.
Imagine Reverend Toller
That's
with
really
some
good.
sort of hyper-strong demon arm, too. That would be pretty cool.
That would be so cool.
Firing his bow and arrow and like cutting people in half or
Just
whatever.
severing
happens.
their heads off.
I can see it,
someone with a
actually. I can
single
totally
arrow.
see it.
Yeah.
Different
He
movie,
great
but
in a-
cool movie.
Yeah.
I mean, look, this is maybe not that chill to say, but I wouldn't mind Lady Eboshi lying face down on me.
You can say
I know
that.
she's
totally
like the
fair.
villain.
No, you can say it.
Look, a beautiful character design.
Mhm.
And
she's a pitcher.
she's a pitcher.
To be clear.
and always in favor of the subs over dubs generally, but Lady Eboshi, as voiced by Minnie Driver, does something,
Oh,
awaken something
yeah.
in me as a young man.
Yeah.
So
I see.
My grandpa was one of those.
A mini driver.
Yeah, he had one.
very good.
It's red. I don't know how old San the princess is supposed to be, so that's another
opinion
reason why I
on
said
San the
that's the other reason why I said Lady
Interesting.
Eboshi.
Interesting.
She's a
She's
lady.
definitely like
So
38
Yeah.
or something. Yeah,
Right.
she's also the Jada Pinkett Smith one, Toki, the lady who works in
Yeah.
pushing the.
Which character?
She's a nice-
she's ebullient and cute. She's the one who works in like the factory.
She's the one whose husband gets blown up or chewed by a wolf or whatever.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Also, that part where one of the giant wolves just grabs a guy's head in its mouth.
Yeah.
That's also kind of a form of sex, I think. Let's talk about Aaron and Carlee's answer to the question.
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to know Carly's. Hey, speaking of Teflon, I feel like I may be able to
I know. I was like,
guess one of
it's
yours.
Dark Waters.
You would show them the video of
Yep.
the cop on the slide.
I would. Yeah, that's never not funny.
True.
Yeah, when you said Teflon Ian, I was like, oh, Dark Waters. I think any Todd Haynes film is revolutionary to a certain extent in some explicit ways and a lot of ways formally. No, what I was going to say actually in terms of a documentary is a documentary film that Aaron and I saw when it came out in 2019 called Hail Satan.
Oh, is that the one about the satanic church?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Okay.
And I feel
don't know
like
about this.
It's a good film.
It's a really good film. It's not explicitly, about like them taking up, like there aren't struggle sessions or anything like that, but they are obviously like operating against many well entrenched establishments, and like their message is really compelling, and like it's just beautiful, and also like seeing all of like the obstacles they run up against, and just like many an Ed Balk that they encounter.
Yep.
I think would be compelling, and if he's looking for some sort of religious text to graft onto that is not anything he's been interested in previously, but still speaks the language and is like part of the world building that he's been a part of for his entire career, that might work. And then the other one I would say, and this is just because of the show that we're on, and because this is one of my favorite movies ever, I think Bringing Out the Dead is like an incredibly revolutionary text, despite I think Scorsese having other sort of aesthetic and narrative impulses. I think Schrader is really doing some phenomenal work there. Yep. And I don't, that's not necessarily the aim of the film per se, but it's certainly something you can glean from it.
Excellent answers, excellent choices.
Yeah.
And also I'm trying to find here, I have Schrader talks about showing this movie to Nick Cage, which is so cool as something you can do. It
is.
Wait,
like,
showed
hey,
First
Nick,
Reform to Nick Cage?
Yeah, just like, hey Nick, what do you think of this? Because they've now worked on 2 films together. Right. Fairly true. They've trauma bonded over the whole dying of the lights thing. And I don't know. It's just cool that you could be like, what do you think of this? Famous actor Nicolas Cage.
And he would tell you.
He will tell you. He'll give you an answer.
And I'm looking it up now to see what he says. Aaron, did you answer?
I haven't yet, but
do it quickly.
I am going to do it very quickly.
No,
my answer would be probably the 1994 action film directed by Steven Seagal on Deadly Ground.
Okay.
Yes.
Famous for his environmental messages in that. Was cut by the studio, where he originally had something like a 15-minute monologue directly at camera just talking about protecting Mother Earth.
Good answer.
Yeah, I'd be like, Reverend Toller, you should take a look at this Steven Seagal movie. I think that it will move you and also be something that you can use to connect with the youth.
That's actually we should go to the Sunrise Movement and get them on Aikido as soon as possible.
I forgot about the Sunrise Movement.
Yeah, me too, and I have a t-shirt of theirs. 2021 was a different time.
It was. There was a Green New Deal.
Oh, we'll talk about that.
Sure was. Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say that's directly related is not to get us on the bummer train too early. Imagining that
we got to get on the bummer train.
Imagining in 1994 that the studios were already killing environmental monologues and realizing, well, maybe if we had a couple more environmental monologues, we'd be looking at like 2-degree change for the future instead of the billions murdering 4-degree change.
That's
could
right.
have been some small choices 30 years ago.
No, I think that's an incredibly salient thought, and one that I think about when I think about climate crisis often is like, it's not like there are big tectonic things that have happened that have been orchestrated by a few decisions by a few men, obviously. But I also think that there are like a lot of small things along the way that could have like immeasurably or maybe even measurably impacted things in a more positive direction, or at least slowed things down. I think about that all the time, Ian.
Yeah, just chipped away, even if it was like marginal, fractional,
Yes.
that could have made a huge difference over the course of the next 100 years.
And I have a list of people here who I'd like to chip away
There
at.
you go. I was going to say, that's why we have paper straws and potato spoons, though, you guys. Those things make substantive difference when
I
it
want to be
comes
clear, that's not what I'm saying. I am not talking about individualized consumerism as a solution to the climate crisis.
So we can be fucking miserable at the coffee place while the world continues to burn and try and like eating a little bit of paper with our latte that has almond milk in it because the cows are bad, but are the almonds worse than the cows? And how am I supposed to know? Because the people telling me the almonds are bad are the dairy industry.
Yeah.
How much oil does it take to press those almonds, you know?
Yeah.
Well, and then oat milk is going to make me freaking blow up like a balloon.
Bloated. Yep.
We should have them on the show.
Yeah, you should do that. Hey, real quick, before we get into the movie, I also have another piece of art that I would like to recommend to anybody listening to the show, please. Which is the album, I believe it's from 2016, by Anoni, formerly Anoni and the Johnstons. It's called Hopelessness. And it is an incredible and visceral and angry album of very beautiful music about the despair of living in the current moment with all of the sort of intersecting crises. There's even a song on it called 4 Degrees that is written more or less from the perspective of like a modern oil baron. Sort of
I like it.
Suggesting like, you know, it's only 4 degrees, it's only 4 degrees, like over and over again. So listen to it. It's beautiful, it's cathartic, and brings me some semblance of peace, feeling the solidarity of that music when I listen to it.
Beautiful. Enough of that bullshit. Let's talk about First Reformed. This is the big movie. It's so weird.
Text.
Isn't it so weird? There's like and we learned, I don't know, you guys haven't heard our Dying of the Light / Dark episode yet because it's not out yet, and also you probably shouldn't listen to it. The show's bad. But I learned from the documentary Paul Schrader, Man in a Room by Alex Ross Perry that's partly about the production of this film. Dying of the Light and the experience making that film basically like, and having it taken away from him, basically killed and rebirthed Paul Schrader. Correct. And we would not have First Reformed and the insane septuagenarian run, and maybe now octogenarian run he's on. No, he's 78, I think. Without the worse than Redbox looking film Dying of the Light. And so maybe that's actually a message of hope, is that from utter devastation, from Superfund site can come a nice movie that made me want to step into traffic 7 years ago. So,
well, there's a certain amount of decay that has to occur, I think, for the realization of the necessity of beauty to happen, right? That's certainly a message in the film. So
right.
I guess that's maybe what that movie is, all the garbage.
Perhaps the death. You got to die to be born again into the everlasting arms of Christ.
That's right.
Something I've been hearing more and more about. This is a film called First Reformed. Just a little bit of background. I mean, if you're listening to this, if you're aware of this podcast, you've already seen this movie. You know what I mean? But film by Paul Schrader, written and directed, released in 2018, May 18th, 2018, although it premiered in 2017 at Venice to abundant praise, which is the name of my
mega church
that I'm setting up. Also, yeah. It stars Ethan Hawke as the minister of a tiny, basically tourist church, like a museum piece. He's in upstate New York, who comes into contact with a doubting, suicidal climate activist and his pregnant wife. Climate activist wants to abort their baby so that she is not born into a world that will be unlivably destroyed by climate change. And first, Reverend Ernst Toller, the Ethan Hawke character, wants to comfort him, and then once the climate activist kills himself, Toller starts to sort of assume it's, Schrader will alternately describe it as taking on his personality or simply like awakening to the truth, and I guess it's a little bit of both. But that's the flick. You guys seen this movie before? What do you think of this movie?
Yes, I have. We've seen the movie more than once. I would say this is probably like the fourth time I've seen the film.
Oh man, Fourth Reformed,
exactly that. And I watched it for the first time. I mean, it was definitely like late 2018 or like very early 2019, like not long after it had been released. And it's kind of fascinating to think about that because I was certainly not quite as left then as I am now. I was not yet as sort of like profoundly radicalized as I am now.
Yang Gang at that point?
I was not Yang Gang at the point. I would say that I was more or less like a pretty comfortable like progressive liberal around like 2018, 2019.
Sure,
and 2019 really was sort of like the year that shifted for me into sort of a frustration with elected leaders and electoral politics and I mean all sorts of things. And I wonder if First Reformed was actually something that may have catalyzed some of that perspective.
Yeah. Where was he radicalized?
Yeah.
The freaking Regal, the Metreon. I don't know.
The AMC Metreon. No, it was
Yes.
probably on our IKEA sofa, which we still have in our apartment, in front of a laptop computer because we were in a small apartment then and did not yet have a television. So that was probably it.
Damn.
But I was less familiar with Schrader than I am now too, of course, but was just like completely blown away and moved by it. And I remember hearing about it before seeing it. And like I said, as a pretty comfortable sort of, character at the time, and I think a little bit less concerned with looming climate crisis, kind of thought, this sounds a little kitschy, a little topical. I don't know how this is going to work. And then watching it, I was like, this is the furthest thing from. This is a pretty perfect movie in terms of examining sort of like that sense of despair and hopelessness that comes with sort of being awakened to the realities and the contradictions, just like ethically, spiritually, morally, of existing in the 21st century.
Beautifully put. Carlee, how did you come to this film? And we've heard some of Aaron's Schrader thoughts on our Obsession episode, but I would love to know where you stand with the man Paul Schrader.
Two of my favorite directors in the world are Paul's Schrader and Verhoeven.
Great Pauls.
This is the film for me that retroactively made me appreciate all of the work of his I had seen previously, and henceforth the work I saw after, even the stuff that he'd made before this, like Light Sleeper, which I hadn't seen when I saw this movie. I saw Light Sleeper a couple years later. I was telling you about this, Jake, and I was like, I get this movie. I understand it. I understand what's happening here. I understand why he made it and how it is talking with stuff that he made later, namely First Reformed.
Yeah.
I just, apologies in advance. I heard Ethan Hawke and Paul Schrader on a Terry Gross interview because I was a different person 7 years ago.
That's okay. She interviews people who are worth like listening
She does.
to.
She's a terrible interviewer. I don't know why she has a claim. I honestly don't think she's good.
You've always held that perspective, by the way, even, years ago.
For a very long time. She's good sometimes at letting people talk. So that's why her interviews are interesting. But she's not a good interviewer. Anyways, I heard the two of them talking about this film and the process of making it and their relationship with religion, respectively. And I love Ethan Hawke. And I was like, well, I have to watch this. And I was like into Paul Schrader, to a certain degree, but I wasn't like as in love with him and his work as I am now. And I saw this film and I was just like blown away by it. I was like, this is the strangest and like most important thing I've ever seen in my life. And, that's hyperbolic, but also true to a certain extent. And for me, I think the biggest imprint this movie initially left on me is I had seen Ethan Hawke do some other things that weren't necessarily like very similar to what he got famous doing, but I had not seen him in this kind of role. And now he's like comfortably sort of operating in this space in a lot of the movies he does.
Yeah.
And I was just like so taken by him as Reverend Toller. It was just such a thrill and also so heartbreaking for me to see an actor that I've loved most of my life in a role that felt just so distinct from the rest of his career. And so like he's doing a lot of physical acting in this movie, and it's not I've never thought of him as a physical actor. And it stuck with me. And then I came back to it. And then as my politics have evolved, I've just fallen in love with it even more.
Mm-hmm. He does a lot of great physical acting on Moon Knight. Just want to put that out there if you want to watch. I mean, it's the first Reformed and the Card Counter together in one show.
Yeah, very true.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, there's like, I think F. Murray Abraham is on it or something.
Nice.
Ian, what about you? When was your, when did you first see this film? And how close did you come to the edge?
This is one of the films that convinced me to do this season of the podcast. I had seen this probably also in 2018. And so when we were thinking about who to talk about for this season, and you suggested Paul Schrader, in my mind was Blue Collar Taxi Driver in this film. I had seen and loved other of his films, but in terms of like, I could do a whole season just talking about this guy because I think he makes such interesting art. Those are the big three for me. I think this was probably the third time watching the film for me. I will admit to a little bit of a crisis of faith where, based on the films we've been watching pre-Dark, I will say pre-Dark, over the last...
Yeah, we're talking like Adam Resurrected, The Walker, what are some of the other ones? Dying in the Light, obviously. Yeah. It doesn't really count. So yeah, he's had a bit of a dry spell.
Yeah.
The canyons, yeah.
Which I think, again, we've talked about them. We found interesting things in there, but I started to wonder.
We basically did an episode on each of them.
We almost did an episode on every single one.
More or less.
And I also read some criticism from critics that I respect who were a little bit cool on this movie. And even though I'd already seen it twice, I started to wonder, like, well, was I so taken with the content because I was already so politically inclined? I mean, I remember watching the film the first time. The conversation that Toller has with Michael sitting in his room, that I'm sure we'll discuss in detail. I had almost an identical conversation with a therapist in like 2014 when I was extremely close to killing myself, and talked about a lot of the same things. And also the therapist I will give credit for, and I think I've maybe even mentioned on the podcast, I would say almost saved my life, in part because he didn't disagree. He was just sort of like, you're right about this stuff, but what are your options? Like, what can you do, even though all these things are true? And I think there's a similar communication style from Toller here, and I found that so affecting the first time. And guess what? I still found it affecting this time. My crisis of faith, totally unnecessary, incredible. The film held up. I think it's perhaps, despite the fact that we're going to get into how much it relies on previous film styles, specifically Winter Light and Diary of a Country Priest, it's maybe the perfect encapsulation of a film that says, all right, I can take these elements, bring in just a few new things, but one of them being a gigantic thing in the form of the climate crisis. And that's enough to make, I think, one of the great pieces of film art that has been made in the 21st century.
Yes.
Yeah. I feel like this movie was this movie allowed me to talk about this stuff that I had been feeling privately and not saying to anybody because I didn't want to make it real, like Beetlejuice in theaters now.
Yep. It's that.
Yeah, and I didn't, Beetlejuice.
Got him.
Just in case. I had not been able to like verbalize these things that I had heard bafflingly few people talking about.
Yeah.
And I specifically remember like Adam McKay on like the DGA podcast or something. He must have been interviewing somebody better to listen to. I don't know why I heard this, but he was talking about one of the guys from The Big Short, like one of the I think the guy Brad Pitt is playing, who's like a statistics guy or whatever, was telling him like all our models are wrong. They can't predict, like it's worse than any of our models or whatever. And I remember just basically being like flat on my back after listening to fucking Adam McKay on a podcast, but like also not saying this to anybody because I didn't want it to be real and everyone else was acting like nothing was happening. And so this movie fucked me up so bad, but also I think it has this twofold effect of like, as all of you said, like radicalizing and being an incredible piece of art. And I think I don't know if this was Schrader's intention, but there is kind of a shot across the bow with the inclusion of the absolute dog ass Neil Young song. To say like we need to be making better art, better art about climate change. Yeah. Well, the scene is great, but like
the song is very silly.
It really feels like he's suggesting we need to apply more aesthetic rigor to art about the climate and stop saying like just saying divest from oil and rhyming it with like mortal coil or whatever the fuck he does.
I think that's right, Jake. I think Schrader does a lot in this film to cheapen the words of really hallowed, like important religious texts and also like words of comfort and things that people use to make meaning. And I think he does that, you know, very explicitly with a lot of the religious conversations. He has like I don't know if it's like there's some like parable, or maybe it's like just like a story, or it's from fucking Corinthians or something, painted on a wall in one of the rooms that they're in. And throughout,
is this at the mega church?
It's at the mega church in the cafeteria, I think. And then it's also like somewhere else, like maybe in one of the sitting rooms, they also have words on the wall. Yeah, there's some text, like scriptural text on the outside of the building as well. It's aestheticized. It's turned into just like decoration. And he's like constantly like cutting it off so you don't see the full you know, scroll. And you know, like when people are having these conversations and he's asking questions, or when Michael's asking him questions, like all of the words feel cheap. And it's, I think, also very intentional that he's constantly, you know, wrapping these conversations and these words in like things about hats for sale and like, you know, the business of the church and like the business of things. He's degrading all of it. And that song in that scene, it felt like it was taking on something similar. Like it didn't contain the weight of the moment. It just felt so feckless.
Yeah.
Right. And then he even shows, and this may be a sanitary consideration, I don't know, but the literal cremated remains of Michael Manzana TV are in the, by the way, did you guys notice that? Were you thinking about Manzana TV the entire time? Just me?
I hadn't thought about it
Character's
once.
name is
just you.
Michael Manzana. So Mary, the Amanda Seyfried character, she's going to scatter the cremated remains of her husband who blew his head off. And his remains are in like what looks like the bag that cereal comes in inside the box. Like it's the most plastic, undignified, just insulting wrapping for like a human life. And I feel like there's something related to what you're saying, Carlee, about the hollowness of these words, the thinness of the way that we're discussing these things prior to the monumental film First Reformed.
Well, and also considering the idea that, like, you know, plastic is like a thing that requires petroleum in order to be produced, and the idea that it's like inescapable even in death, his sort of like participation in this machine and the churns of all these capitalist impulses that continue to pollute and destroy as he's creating this sort of political statement out of his own death.
I think that's all exactly right. But I wanted to add just to Carlee's point, to me, it threads the needle so well because it's not, I don't even mean to dog on McKay. We've already mentioned McKay in this episode, but it's not absurdity in a way where like the comedy becomes the point, or the irony is sort of like standing in front of everything else. Because in that beautiful memorial scene where they're singing Neil Young, and the people singing are a youth choir in matching puffer jackets, very ridiculous on its face, but it's not totally played as a joke, right? You sort of have to notice that it's a joke. And then also while they're singing, it cuts to Tuller's face, to Ethan Hawke's face, and he's sort of like looking off camera. We get this beautiful, one of the many transcendental style shots in the film where it just sits on him. He's not speaking. We're just hearing the choir, and we have to just share his experience of like, what is the meaning of this? Is it totally hollow to just hear this kind of corny art? And what could we actually do? What would meaningful action look like in the face of something like this? You know, And the power of the background, which is this super fun site that is sort of like blaring behind all of this weird pageantry in front of it, I think just creates this beautiful contrast. But it's a film that's smart enough where it's not trying to like get you in on a bit of dramatic irony where you're like high-fiving each other. It's sort of saying like, look, you understand as an audience all the nuance of what's going on here. The character also understands it. And now I'm just going to make you sit with it for like 20 seconds and think about like, well, what can you make of that? What's the takeaway? Don't just experience it as like, oh, I get it. I get the irony. But like, now what? What happens after that?
Right. Mm-hmm. We should say a note on style, a note on here's sort of like the elevator pitch of First Reformed. It's Paul Schrader finally actively trying to apply the tenets of transcendental style, this tendency in film art that he wrote a book about when he was 24 and has
40 years later now he's decided
has been associated with this whole time, but I think pretty comfortably is like not using it in most of his
I think he said I haven't generally used it.
So he's finally making a transcendental film, and I think also it's an update of, you know, the Travis Bickle character, the American Gigolo, the Light Sleeper, the Rolling Thunder, all of these angry God's lonely men characters, but all of a sudden there is a very real thing to be angry at instead of this kind of ambient, like, society isn't working for me or I don't fit in thing. There's a real target now, and it's thrilling to see. And he's also, you know, he's dealing with his Calvinist faith pretty directly. That's my pitch on this film. And it's also, I remember I was working at the video store when this came out, maybe? I think so. Or I was hanging out at the video store where I would work in the future. And I remember this one know-it-all guy who worked there and also was very fond of the F slur. So just to get out in front of me being better than this guy. He said, it's just Winter Light. Like, he just remade Winter Light.
It's not just Winter Light.
Like, it's not just Winter Light. The Ingmar Bergman film Winter Light, which is obviously a large influence on the structure of this film and sort of the setup of the film, but I think the film crucially deviates from and expands upon it. But it's also like, it's Winter Light for now.
Yeah, that doesn't mean you beat the movie. I mean, maybe we can take this moment to talk about the extremely direct influences from Bergman and Bresson, because you're right. It's like the huge parts of the plot are borrowed from it, but that doesn't mean that you like outsmarted the film or something. Just because you know that doesn't mean that there's nothing in it for you. So, should we talk about where the stuff comes from?
Yeah. So the film it's got a number of antecedents, a number of strong influences. First of all, I think importantly, Schrader was inspired aesthetically, especially to make this film when he did, by the Pavel Pawlikowski film Ida. Inspired the I think what's the word? Kind of sort of severeness, the austerity of the visual, the aspect ratio, which is I think the Academy ratio or something close to it.
Yeah, for those who haven't seen Ida, it's about a young woman thinking about becoming a nun and was like a crossover art house semi-mainstream hit. Obviously, I use that, in moderation, but I think it's the type of thing that Schrader maybe could see and realize, oh, you could make a modern transcendental film that people will watch and engage with seriously.
Deeply suffused with guilt as well. A past guest of the show, friend of the pod, Eric Markovitz, pitched Ida to me as it's a movie about how Polish Catholics are still on the hook for the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't forget that you guys did that. So great film. And then there's the Bergman film Winter Light, which we can get into. And then, of course, Schrader's friend Bresson with his famous film Diary of a Country Priest.
Sometimes, man, you just surprise me. Sometimes
it comes out of left field sometimes, my friend. It is really good.
And did I get a chance to watch that film? No, but I took the time to make it
interesting.
Song.
Yeah.
Ian, did you see Diary of a Country Priest?
Yes, I rewatched it. I'd seen it before, but I wanted to make sure I was up on it. happy to let you take most of it, Aaron, here if you want to talk through it. But I will say that the only parts we've discussed before are the fundamental idea of this guy sort of like suffering, has this unnamed for most of the film stomach ailment. He is a priest, and he eats bread dipped in wine and water, which we've seen in at least 2 other Schrader films, and comes up here. But this ailing priest character, do you want to talk about the Bresson film?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start by saying that I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to Bresson. I think that Country Priest is the third of his features I've seen. I've seen A Man Escaped, and I've seen Pickpocket, 2 of those.
Both great.
And, both excellent. I would say that, I love the procedural elements and the austerity of A Man Escaped and just how slow moving it is and the refinement of its details. I also like Pickpocket for similar reasons, and also because it, very much feels like the like ground zero of a lot of Schrader's work and the thing that he'll, kind of routinely come back to in terms of how he sort of structures and specifically ends a lot of his movies. I didn't love Country Priest as much. And I don't think you're meant to. Like, it is a rather punishing, like, excursion into a man's sort of, how do I say this? Into his suffering, as you said, and he is in a kind of small community. The parishioners are like openly hostile towards him and reject his messages and his attempts to build community on the basis of his faith. But also you see that he is very much an architect of his own misery as well, because of the, one, like, sort of ascetic lifestyle that he leads and his sort of darkness, and also the immovability of his faith. Often when he tries to counsel or console or guide people spiritually, he's often he sounds very paternalistic. He's sort of moralizing. He's getting angry with these parishioners and with members of the community. But it does end on a rather hopeful note, even in spoiler, the priest's death. Him sort of.
It sounds pretty hopeful to me.
Yeah, which I can see why that offers a compelling and necessary counterpoint to something like Winter Light for Schrader, especially when we get into the ending of First Reformed, which I always read as being rather hopeful while also, sort of equivocating on that a little bit and still, not going all the way into like a happy ending.
Carlee stepped out when I did my little bit. So just to be clear, Carlee, we were discussing the Robert-Bresson film Diary of a Country Priest. Just so you know. And then
is that you?
Yeah, that's me. I tried to go up to the yes octave, but I decided
you're almost there.
You're so close. By the way, Jake, and sorry if I'm getting ahead of you and spoiling here, but I'm putting you on notice because earlier this week you messaged me and you started an interaction with me one morning by sort of being like, not really feeling Winter Light.
Oh, yeah.
And I immediately became furious with you. I threw my phone across the room. It took me about an hour to collect myself and just say, LMAO, what? Question mark.
So here's just to finish the thought, this film is a combination of Diary of a Country Priest and Winter Light, and then the ending apparently is from Ordette.
Yes.
The Dreyer film.
Well, arguably.
The Dreyer film. Which I have not seen, but it's inspired by Ordette. But with Winter Light, I've never been a huge Bergman guy. I feel like I respect it. I respect the craft is obviously undeniable, but I feel like his things that kept him up at night are not the things that keep me up at night, or maybe the way he's articulating them, they don't just get into my bones the way that the things that keep Schrader and Herzog and who are my other guys? Who are my guys, Ian?
Clint Eastwood. I think you like that guy.
Clint Eastwood. Yeah, I've seen a couple of his movies.
Guy.
Yeah.
Griffith is another one that I know that you've championed quite a bit.
One film in particular.
Nate Parker. Well, it's the same. Yeah. He made the remake. Yeah, I mean, Bergman's has never really hit for me, and I watched Winter Light having seen this first, and obviously I'm like, ha, this is crazy, because it's about a priest in a church that has like 6 people in it, and there's a married couple, and the wife comes and says, "Can you help my husband? He wants to kill himself because China's going to get the atom bomb."
Mm-hmm.
And he heard on the radio that the Chinese people are full of hate and they will just use it. And then there's also a very severe, bespectacled woman who is in love with the priest.
Trying to take care of him, and it makes him mad all the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he's like sick.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's... And then the guy played by Max von Sydow from The Exorcist, he shoots himself in the head with a rifle, and like the priest character finds him. I mean, it's very... A lot of the setup is very similar, but it just didn't quite click for me. And my extremely fiery take here, First Reformed is a better film, I think, than Winterlight. I think First Reformed has more to say about, at least certainly, obviously, it has more to say about my experience hoy en dia, but I don't know. I think it's got more going on. First of all, more colors. Winterlight's in black and white.
More
This one's
colors.
got...
I mean, I'll say as well, I mean, I differ from you in that I love Bergman. Part of that being that I grew up in the faith and in the church, and so the stuff that keeps Bergman up at night is stuff that I was struggling with.
Tall as well, so I think the Swedes probably.
That. Yeah, and few people love a beautiful face like Bergman. He's got his sort of coterie of gorgeous Scandinavian women, and I was a fan as a teenager. So. But I'll go ahead and say I honestly do think that First Reformed is a rare piece of art that draws heavily from its two reference points, and actually I think eclipses both of them in its dealing with the subject matter and also transcending it in ways that are vital and necessary for the time in which it exists.
I agree. The films that it's drawing from are very effective, I think, at smaller projects. And obviously, this is the kind of thing that always comes up in historical film discussion, but they're breaking grounds a little bit more at the time. So I think the form of the films maybe stands on its own better, although the form of this film is certainly challenging enough for a mainstream audience as well. But I think those films, I mean, Winterlight opens with like a 12-minute church service that there's no other dialogue. I mean, I don't know if Schrader famously doesn't include Bergman in his like main coterie of transcendental style guys, because Bergman, even though he discusses spirituality and tries to evince spirituality on screen, a lot of the formal choices he's making are sort of weirdly more conventional than somebody like Bresson or Ozu or Dreyer, because he's still like cutting with action, right? He's cutting to show different things, and when he uses close-ups, it's close-ups on people who tend to be talking, and the sort of things that Schrader says transcendental style requires, sort of like more distance, more space. In Diary of a Country Priest, we get some of the exact same shots in this film where somebody we see a door for a couple seconds, then somebody shows up, goes into the door, closes the door, we're still watching the door, right? We get almost the same thing when Toller goes to the Manzana's house here. And I think I agree with you guys that the reason this film is better is because it does those things. It takes those same concerns. It takes the concerns about what does it mean to be a spiritual leader in a community that basically thinks you're like a piece of shit loser. What does it mean to be faced with like your own death? What does it mean to be faced with other people's suicidal concerns or crises of faith? And on top of that, how do you deal with like an extinction level event in the face of a reconsecration that's like this weird little business like chance to show off and celebrate the history of a church without understanding anything about the lessons that we should be garnering about that church, to say like, this is a place where we had the Underground Railroad. This is a place that's seen atrocities and knew how to respond to them. And now we have this heavily polluting industry leader in the form of Balk, who is basically...
He's the dog shooting guy from The Leftovers.
He is.
That's right.
I'm never going to remember the name of Michael Gaston or Gaston. Yeah. He is the dog shooting guy from The Leftovers. He's also in the pilot of The Sopranos.
He is?
Yeah, he owes money to Tony in the first episode of The Sopranos.
I don't remember him.
He's a great character.
He is. But I wanted to give you some credit here, Jake. You talked about feeling like prior to watching this movie. Yes, you can get excited.
Just pump my fists because I'm going to get some credit. So excited.
You talked about just sort of like the sense of embarrassment or uncertainty about how, why aren't people talking about this? There's an excellently framed or played out moment in this film where Toller is sort of like already starting to be radicalized, and he tries to confront the Balk character in like a local Denny's basically about what the problem is. And Balk says a bunch of things, wonderful things, but he says like, I'm an industry leader in the energy business, so it's my business to keep on track with this stuff. And actually, a lot of these predictions have been wrong. And also, there's stuff going on in your life. You're a loser, so maybe you shouldn't be worrying about. These are the same ways people get shut down if you try to bring up these concerns. When people are like throwing oil on paintings in the Louvre, people say like, well, did you know that one of those guys went to jail and maybe has a bad relationship with his mom? So like, are their concerns even valid? And also, did you know that actually in one specific ocean in the world, the fish population went up, not down? So maybe climate change is fake and we don't have to worry about it. And then you feel like, oh, I guess, I'm a stupid asshole. I'm sorry for bringing it up. And I embarrassed everybody. So that's bad.
Yeah. It's funny that these people would suggest that the only way you can be like worth listening to is if you are morally impeachable in every aspect.
Right.
And they forget there's exactly one guy who's like that. Bunch of pictures of him in the churches in this film.
Cedric the Entertainer.
Cedric Kyles. Have some respect. Yeah, I mean, there's something about I want to talk about the churches really quickly, and it sort of connects to all these things that we're talking about. This absence, this disconnection from history, and in the film I think it draws a sort of equivalence, or it draws a comparison between being disconnected from the planet, our responsibility to be stewards of the planet. Stewards, it makes me feel like I'm doing like a fucking land acknowledgement before a meeting of like real estate executives or something. But like taking care of the fucking rock that we live on that birthed us, where there's a scene where Toller is, he's depressed, he's in crisis, and he's I think journaling, and he gets up and he goes into the church, the First Reformed Church, and lays down on one of the pews, and it's obviously giving him peace. And it reminded me of my experience being in old churches, and I'm not a religious person at all, but being in like a building that has seen historic movements, that's seen things happen, it's this like representation of constancy and of like my connection to my place in the human tapestry, and then it cuts immediately to him walking across the big logo, doormat of the Abundant Life Church.
Yes.
And there's just like the sense of meaningful spaces being gone, meaningful spaces being removed, destroyed, replaced with logos, with like custom polo shirts. This sense of disrespect for the world as it was before we got here, the people who are currently alive. And I mean, I think that's an America problem.
It absolutely is. There aren't meaningful spaces in America. No. We're a very young country, and I think it's one of the reasons that a grand thesis of mine is that the lack of, this is a word I say all the time, the lack of reverence in America as a society, and even just the way we practice religions that supposedly contain a great deal of reverence. Like, there's so little attachment to history spatially, topographically, with the places that we live. So there's this impermanence that I think is just sort of like humming in the background of right. Americans constantly. And I think it allows for a lot of like, not just alienation, but like this detachment from our connection to people that just don't like live near us or by us or like before us or after us. Like that doesn't exist, I think, even in the sort of evocation of, the spaces we go to often. And importantly, First Reformed Church was built by settlers. So it's not like it
Right.
itself is also like not, it's not a pristine artifact of history.
I mean, that's a big thing, you know, connecting this to Unforgiven or whatever. Like if we want to look at, we cannot fundamentally connect to our history here without just seeing the blood pouring out of the Overlook Hotel elevator. Like it's all cruelty and murder. And so
ecological murder as well. Like
yeah, exactly.
You know, devastating the land in order to colonize it and not just even the people.
The national parks kicked indigenous people out of spaces that they were living on, often sustainably, certainly with sustainable practices that might be learned from, and these people were kicked off their ancestral homeland so that white people could come look at the trees and write a poem about, you know, how it's like a virginal woman or whatever. I mean, the trees are nice, to be clear. I love trees. But
we love trees.
I think it's important, though, too, the contradiction that exists in just like the existence of First Reformed, the church in the film, because as you said, Carlee, like it is the product of a colonial project, but
a Dutch colonial project too. Those guys were really good at this. They were good,
right? But also historically, it also has it would participate in sort of a radical history as well, that it was used to hide slaves fleeing to the north, right? That there is like this contradiction there between the two, sort of, you know, in terms of its liberating value as like this structure that once had some sort of like revolutionary context to it, that it came from a colonial project that displaced, and from the Dutch specifically, who we know have a very dicey history as it pertains to like, you know, slavery and all of that. So
dicey present as well. Check out some of the stuff they do at Christmas.
Very good. Yes.
Yep.
Santa's friend.
Sinterklaas.
I think the slave door is so fucking important because
it's incredible, and it's also like it's a funny joke, like the him getting so dark in front of these kids, like it's a. But at the same time, like I don't know if I've talked about this. In high school, I had to do like an internship at a historic site for a class I was taking, like a history in like,
was it a mission?
It's DC, so it was like a living history class. No, this was in DC, so it was
not California
Sully
stuff.
Plantation.
Okay.
Which was the home of Robert E. Lee's grandfather.
Interesting. And owned by the current owners of Comet Pizza.
That's right.
Yeah, I believe so. And so just briefly, you know, I had to like, it was a historic house, but it was important enough that they like rerouted the interstate that went to the Dulles airports to reduce vibrations that might damage this home.
Oh God.
And they also like, they preserved the slave quarters, some of them in order to serve as an educational tool or whatever. But it was a slave owner's house. It's a fucking plantation. And I was, I had to like give tours of it to like Girl Scouts. And I'm like a 17-year-old standing in the room with the big timeline on the wall, going through all the stuff. And like a little 6-year-old raises her hand and says, "Why was there slaves?" And all of the parents and stuff lean in and they're like, "All right, big boy, let's see." And like, this is the kind of thing where like we should all have thrown in the towel. Like we've just figured out a way to teach this history that we can get through without laying flat on our backs. Like we've just heard something Adam McKay said, but like there's a world, like we all got to get the vest on. I don't know what to say. I've managed to get this far into the podcast without saying we all need to get the vest on. I don't know, Ian. Hope is a discipline or whatever, right? What do you think about this?
Look, I think this is a perfect chance to set us up to talk about the Toller-Michael conversation. But first, I just want to briefly say that I think you're right, Jake. And one of the great parts of that scene where Toller's talking to these kids about this history and goes, you know, too grim about it, maybe is kind of the joke.
Yeah, he's specifically he's asking them to imagine how terrifying it must have been to be lying in a hole in the dark, hiding from slave catchers.
Yeah, he says like hearing your breath and hoping that they don't catch wind of you inside here and take away your whole family or something. You know, something
I'm
really
recalling
horrific.
too. Sorry to interrupt. I'm recalling too that he specifically singles out of like the 4 children the black boy to pick up the door with him to like help him. Like here's the slave quarters, you know. And anyway, continue. No,
you're right, and I think. But part of the question is, look, I grew up in liberal California, and we were certainly the school. Yeah, the school I went to was against racism, and they talked about how great Martin Luther King was and how great nonviolent resistance is. But it's the type of school system that I would argue produces mostly people who are polite and vote for kind of the right things, and that's the extent of their radicalism, right? It produces people who say like, well, I agree that climate change is bad. I still live in a 2,500 square foot house and fly 4 times a year to go on vacation. And it produces people who end up churning out the same system that is destroying people across the world.
Right. Look at this beautiful image of all the people of the world holding hands that I generated using ChatGPT, and now a lake is gone.
Exactly.
I think the detachment between, or the sort of like a synchronicity, I don't know what the word is, between the slave quarters or the slave door and then like the church being built by Dutch colonial people, settlers, and then the ecological crisis that's like present and all. Like, I think the discordance of all of that is the point, because like, okay, so like they helped slaves escape on the Underground Railroad, but like also there's like present day violence that the church is participating in because it's accepting funding from the sky, you know. So it's like that. I think those contradictions are meant to be illuminated in the fact that like we do spend a moment on this slave door, and it's very, you know, that type of violence against people is like very directly tied to ecological violence, always has and always will be. The empire that built slavery is also the empire that is like destroying the world.
Right. International shipping routes that once ferried enslaved, like stolen people from Africa, are now also just like dropping oil into the water and transporting a bunch of bullshit that nobody needs and impoverishing the people who make it.
Yes.
And then, you know who has been sort of systematically corralled into areas near, for example, ports where they inhale a bunch of shit that kills them is largely black and brown people. Still happening.
Yep.
It's so fucking sick, dude. It's so tight. Ian, Carlos Slim is probably the closest to you, so I'm going to assign him to your responsibility.
Yep.
Perfect.
And then Bezos probably closer to... Do you think he's closer to me or you guys?
It's definitely us, because he's in PNW, right?
Okay.
Yeah, he is. Yep.
I think so. And then Bill Gates, he's probably up there too. Honestly, I mean, I'm looking at this. This is a list from... When is this from? 2023. So Musk's emissions are actually pretty low on this list relatively. So I guess I'll go for like... Maybe I'll just do the remaining 7 on the list here. I'll get them all.
That's really nice.
Okay. Let's talk about the... And by the way, when I say get these guys, I mean talk to them.
Yes.
I'm talking about a face-to-face interaction in which, let's just say their minds will be permanently changed after we talk to them. Let's talk about the conversation with Michael, because first of all, I want to shout out, and I think Justin Chang, the LA Times film critic, he at the time kind of lamented the fact that there isn't quite an awards category to reward things like Philip Ettinger's basically one scene performance in this film, which is remarkable. Just like so much, he plays Michael Manzana. There's so much painful restraint, and he seems like he's trying to convince himself to even bother talking to this guy. And he's going through what feels like a very practiced, like, organizer talk, you know, where he's like, let me ask you this. Like, he's trying to relate it to Father Toller's experience. And it's just like devastating. I don't know if looking at this guy's face, I can hardly stand it, you know.
Yeah, to set it up for the listener in case they haven't seen the film in a while, I'm going to assume they've seen the film. But this is the scene where Toller goes to visit Amanda Seyfried's husband, who wants to maybe abort their child and is feeling extremely despairing about the future of the planet. Toller walks in. We get this basically like beautiful modern tatami 2-shot of the two of them. We're like on the same level. One of them sitting in like a desk chair and the other one's sitting on, I don't know, weird bed or something. I forget. But
I would say if I was his therapist, I might suggest that he could close the laptop that's constantly showing the heat map of the world slowly increasing and then going back to, just close the laptop sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. I looked up the script and it's wonderful. It describes like what's on the walls and the fact that that clearly Schrader had this all in mind. It's like it's gonna be showing all of these unpassable boundaries that have already been passed and like what the future looks like. Seems like Schrader did at least some research about what this meant, and the conversation begins by him saying something along the lines of, "Okay, in the future, when let's say for the sake of arguments, my unborn child is a little girl. Let's say that she grows up and she looks at me, and he gives this big list of all these crises that are going to occur, and he says, if she looks at me and says, 'You knew all along, didn't you?' What am I supposed to say to her?" And it's at this point the film is not dismissive of his concerns, but Toller is kind of like, okay, he went on like that for a while. He's like talking about all these effects that Central Africa is going to be starving. And to be honest, I think the future of climate crisis is going to be invisible for lots of people. I can say right now, the effects of climate crises are invisible to people because it takes the form of low crop production that affects mostly young and old people who can't get away with like eating fewer calories in a year or something, right? And they end up dying of hunger-related illness. And they're still dying in the millions right now. But what Michael is talking about is the near future, very probable events where maybe 1 billion people die from this over the course of the next 40 years or next 50 years, or maybe more. But Toller engages with this and then I think offers to me what I think is the thesis, and maybe I know we don't have a ton of time here, so maybe we can connect it to the finale and the question of like, is the end despairing or is it hopeful? So Michael asks all these questions and Ernst Toller says to him, "Courage is the solution to despair. We have to choose despite uncertainty." He talks about the uncertainty of the human experience, that for hundreds of years, people have understood that maybe their lives are meaningless and maybe the future of their families is very bleak. They awaken in the nights to blackness, or however he puts it. And he says, wisdom is holding two contradictory truths in our mind simultaneously. And that's the truth of the world is maybe rocketing towards this really awful, horrific scenario. And also the truth of maybe we need to treat each other with grace and try to do as much as we can now to help each other and be optimistic about the results that can come from that. And I think that's the challenge of the movie to me, is to say, can you do both of them without giving up on the other one? Because as soon as you give up on half of that, you failed. And if we give up on half of that collectively, we failed maybe the future of humanity. Too despairing or too hopeful, too naive. I don't know what you guys think.
Toller finishes stronger than he starts in that conversation, because he opens with, well, things get you down, which is like one of my favorite. I heard that line last night and I was like,
so funny.
Paul.
It's so great.
Yeah, I mean, Schrader himself, as with so many of these movies, I think he likes to conceal exactly how he feels about these things while nevertheless making the movie Blue Collar, he suggested with Blue Collar, he suggested with this film sometimes that like he thought this would be a compelling conundrum for a character to face in a movie. And it's as if, he looked at the headlines and was like, this is something that would animate my art. But then other times he'll talk about, he said this to Slash Film, of all places. I think we made our choice. I don't think there's any way to roll back this technological evolution. The planet is just fine. If there's a nuclear holocaust today, in 50,000 years, the planet would be up and running again, healthier than ever, because we're not on it. And maybe evolution would take a little smarter course next time. The only thing that's endangered is us. I don't really see a way how this species emerges from this century. I don't see a scenario for that. This is the world my kids live in, the world you live in. I'll be gone before that time. But as Michael says to Toller, you will live to see this unlivability. So if you're optimistic, you're not paying attention. Well, that becomes the interesting question of the film. Is he an environmentalist first and foremost, or does he have another affliction, which is what would be the sickness unto death? And so with Schrader, I also, I sometimes don't know exactly if he's mostly worried about, if he's really worried about climate change as like a new apocalypse, or if he's slotting it into the many apocalypses he's been worried about his whole life, and it's just one of the many. Me personally, it's too hot outside.
Right, you are, Jake.
Well, I just
It's
don't,
cooking.
I can get down in the dumps. I can get despairing about how I haven't heard back from a job I applied to, or how my stepmom's mad at me, and I can have like an outsized reaction to that. But this feels like a different thing, as Ian said to his therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it is, right? It's
the depression is right.
I think that there is obviously validity to that despair. And I have felt it many times in my life. I have gone through something like this where I was in the bout of just like a prolonged, what is the closest I've ever felt to, depression because of this, because of like ecological collapse, because of climate crisis and my fears around it. And, interestingly, if we're talking about the ending, I agree with the ending, but the ending also, notably does not validate the idea that you must bring life into the world that we are facing, that is coming down the pipeline.
Right.
I don't know where he stands on that, but for me, I know that this, becomes sort of a well-tread kind of bugbear on Twitter, where people talk about this and criticize people who voice this opinion, and even people in left spaces, finger wag at the despair of people saying I don't want to bring a child into the world that is on the path that it's on, and really feels like it's kind of on those rails and sort of immovable at this point, unstoppable. But I kind of agree with it a little bit. I mean, I've made conscious choices in my life to not procreate because of that anxiety. You know what I mean? And I still think that there's a duty and a responsibility to be here and to care for people and to do everything that we can within our small circles. But I also recognize the nature of the power that we're up against when it comes to that. The insufficiency of the responses, even by people who are ostensibly on our side in that argument. And I think that we're sort of destined for a lot of what Michael Manzana mentions in there. We're already seeing a lot of it, and I think that it feels like a relative certainty at this point that by the close of this century, we will see a world reshaped by this ecological crisis in ways that are overwhelmingly negative and dangerous to many people.
Yeah, I mean, Ian, I remember once talking to you about how I thought everybody should just stop having kids, and then you sort of macroeconomically push back on that, and you're like, that's going to cause problems for the labor pool. We need new people are going to get tired.
And look,
old.
I think that, and I will never criticize people who continue to bring children into this world. I don't think that it's a fundamental wrong or anything. I guess let's get that clear. And I don't think the movie comes down on either side either. But
right, I mean, it's part of the hope, right? It's one of the, I guess, acts of conscious hope that you can take is to have a child.
I think it's just an acknowledgement that it's a certainty of life, that there will be more life until there can't be anymore, that life sustains itself, and that, as Toller says, preservation is an act of creation in this, that our duty to protect and to try to fix what we can and to care for the people in our surroundings is vital and essential, because life will continue to populate the planet.
Yeah, this is one of those instances where this is why you can never stand by your words. Terrible idea to stand by your words in the past. Totally disagree with myself in what you just described as me saying to you, Jake. I will say, first of all,
I mean, it was It was prior to the release of this film, I think. I mean, it was at least 7 years ago.
Yeah. I think for me, I feel the exact same way you do, Aaron. It's not the type of thing that I have enough certainty about for the future to ever criticize somebody else. I have nieces and nephews. They're so wonderful. I'm glad that they're in the world and that I know them. But for me, the uncertainty about what the future of children's lives looks like and what even just the experience of being alive brings to people, even without a climate crisis, already makes me uncertain enough about having a kid. But adding that on top is sort of like the tipping point for me.
I've come close to asking my dad the question that Michael Manzana suggests his theoretical daughter could ask him, which is like, first of all, with her? And second, I was worried about nukes or whatever before all this hot weather stuff. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just feel I watched how to blow up a pipeline the other day, which I had heard, like from Aaron, I had heard some not overwhelming praise for this film. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but the film does sort of come down on at the end. It's like, isn't it cool that they blew up that pipeline? Spoilers. The movie is pretty celebratory of the blowing up of a pipeline. And it just made me think, like, we're together with the Underground Railroad conversation, together with everything that Michael says in the film, like, we're so far from the conversation we should be having, which is not like, hey, should I, as an individual, stop shopping at Temu? Which, like, yes, obviously. But the conversation we should be having is like, do we escalate from property destruction to violence against individuals? Right. Like, that's the place where we should be. And it's insane that, like, I can't believe we talk about this with Gaza as well, which is a crime against humanity. It's an act of genocide, and it is also part of the climate crisis, and it's connected to extraction, and the whole thing is one evil nexus. Yep. But, like, I sit at my desk at work and I'm like, what the fuck am I I'm doing a spreadsheet and it's not about any of this stuff, you know? And I was thinking during the film, like, we need people whose job it is to think about how to live your life and to counsel everyone else on what they've arrived at. And it sucks that those people are so tied up in, like, which guys who were talking about this 2,000 years ago are correct. And they're all wrapped up in, like, whether you should kick your trans grandkid out of your house or try to send them to a camp where they will get psychologically abused. Like, that this is all wrapped up in that kind of bullshit, instead of, we should have wandering philosophers, wandering, like, professional thinkers. And frankly, if there's anything close to that currently, it is the Noble Podcaster.
It's true.
Okay.
I was gonna dub us the woke Ronin.
Yes. No, but I mean, like, there should be people because it's hard to think about this stuff all the time, and some people aren't good at it, or they don't want to do it, or they're really good at growing apples, or they're really good at teaching kids how to paint or whatever, and so they should be welcome to do that well. Some of us think about, how do you live?
It's not just that it's hard to think about it all the time. It's that it's the reconciliation of, like, the sort of daily mundaneities of existence under capitalism, and then reconciling that with, these big existential questions that feel silly, finger quotes, because, like, the spreadsheets are what is important, right? And this sort of, like, grand thinking about, like, well, like, what do we do? And also, like, where am I in all of this? And how do I make sense of this? And then there's the thing between that, which is, like, what are we to do? Like, what if I do want to do something? Like, what does that look like? And there's the people who are vocal and active are, just, you know, systematically derided, and they're painted in the media as fools, if not summarily executed in some form or another. So there's no even legitimizing of this as like something to ponder, let alone like it being something we should act on.
Not to mention, I think sort of implicit in what you're saying, Carlee, is the question of you still need to be able to pay for your food every day. Of course, people are, particularly people who maybe haven't grown up with this type of focus on long-term thinking. And that's not a judgment. That's just a lot of the world conditionally is in a position where they have to focus on, all right, what does the survival of my family look like this year? And that is just an absolute necessity in terms of food, housing, medication. And that just makes it very challenging to say, all right, I'm going to start making lifestyle choices that support a better environmental condition in the far future. And I'm actually not one to totally set aside like individual action, because I do think individual action is part of making this a practice, keeping it top of mind, right? I don't think individual recycling or like buying an electric car is going to save the planet by any means. But I do think forcing yourself to start to change your practices daily and become a model for other people is the beginning, or can be a beginning, to collectivization that would actually lead to mass action and voting behavior and demanding leaders who are massively to the left, or like much more drastic on climate action than basically any of the ones available to us right now. But I agree that there's an impotence to feeling like, well, you right now, what can you do to slow this? And there's not that many options, which I think is what you're saying. And that does become very challenging, and challenging to not fall into despair in the same moment.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what you can do as an individual. You only have to get it right once.
Now I've got a pushback here, though, even though it's a joke. I think I agree with you, Ian. I agree with you, Carlee. I agree with you to a certain extent, Jake, about this. That, you know, like I face this same like spiritual upheaval and like reckoning with despair. And I have, you know, somebody who is, well, I'll just say that no one cares and everyone knows anyway. I had a sponsor in my program of recovery who, you know, talking through this and my resentments and my fears and my anxieties around this is like, you're not doing anything about it. You're not participating. You're simply living in the resentment and the despair. And you have to be able to, like you said, Ian, ask, like, you know, as minuscule as it may feel, what individual things can I do to reckon with it, to change it, and to be a model to other people to do that? And so, like, you know, I think it doesn't get to this quite in the film, but I have believed this and tell myself this in those moments when I feel this is like, yes, I want to put the vest on most days when I like read something in the news, but to everyone else who shares that feeling, you actually have a responsibility not to put the vest on, you know, and it doesn't mean that you don't have to fight, and that doesn't mean that you can't, you know, eventually destroy something. I'll whisper in case, you know, the feds are listening, but you have a responsibility to do that without destroying yourself in the process in order to carry that on. Yeah. And that to me is the crucial element of this.
I'm not suggesting that we blow ourselves up.
Oh, very good.
No. I think, you know, the world is becoming increasingly unlivable for poor people. And I'm just suggesting we make it unlivable for the rich people. And Ian, you've pushed back in the past on the idea of political assassination in very compelling terms, because who's to say that only the politicians who we feel deserve to be assassinated get assassinated? However, numbers are hard and fast. So if we set like a net worth amount, and everyone above that, boom. And I'm sorry, Rihanna is a billionaire. Yeah. She got to go. And then, unfortunately, once she's gone, the baby probably gets it. Baby got to go. I'm kidding. The baby's fine. But I think, I mean, and I think at this point, you know, as much as I sometimes feel so constrained that the only thing that sounds like it'll make any sense is violence, is punishment for these people who is attacking back the people who are killing us for their own worldly pleasure. At the very least, we got to sink some fucking yachts. We got to sink some yachts. We got to seize some land. That's just property damage. And also anybody who says that property damage is like a real crime should get their property damage as well.
Yeah, you're a cop.
You're a fed.
Yes, that's correct.
You're a fucking cop. And I'm saying no hurting anybody yet.
Mm-hmm.
But some of this stuff, and also like in How to Blow Up a Pipeline, be careful about the collateral damage because sometimes when you know, maybe we could take the yacht out of the ocean first and then break
on the
it.
dry dock. That could
Also,
be good.
taking it out of the ocean usually breaks it, right? I have to hop off. I have to go to. I'm scheduled to introduce somebody at a recon station. But I do want to say this has been lovely and enervating, and I watched this film the second time and did not feel the same sense of dread. I felt sort of activated in a way that's fine. That's actually totally fine. Nobody worry about me. And I do want to say to anyone listening to this, thank you for listening. Don't use ChatGPT even as a bit. That's an individual action you can take. And also, I just want to say Carlos Slim, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Bernard Arnault, Michael Dell, Larry Ellison, Elon Musk, Eric Schmidt, Laureen Powell, and then, they'll update this list once we need new guys. So
the
just want to say those guys.
The next 10, yeah.
The next 10,
once we need new guys.
And Aaron and Carlee, lovely to see you.
I love you. I'm sorry for making it short and sad.
That's okay. And lastly, Schrader showed the film to Nick Cage, and Cage said, I believe he lives. I believe she saved him. That's what I want to believe. And I think that's a beautiful thing that Nick Cage thinks that. And luckily he hemorrhages money every day, so he will not have to face.
He's dodging this list.
The device. Yeah.
He's staying
right.
just below the line.
Love you guys.
Love you.
I will talk
Love
to you
you too,
soon. I'm
buddy.
excited to hear whatever you get up to. See if you can hit 5 hours.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, Jay.
Right.
Bye.
So, yeah. All right.
Okay.
Anything I figured, of course, we should talk about the ending of the film, and we can talk about other formal stuff or anything in the movie that you guys excited about, like, or fond of. Anything else that you really wanted to get to here?
I mean, I think, part of it, because we are all who we are, is just, continuing to illuminate the film's very correct and very well researched points about the looming climate apocalypse. And like, I don't know, there's just a lot there but like, when he's citing like those IPCC numbers in that conversation, like they're all correct. And there was even like messages after the fact, in like 2018 after this movie was made that were even more dire, that are like, we've got to get these things down by 2030 and we've got to be at net zero across the entire globe by 2050. Otherwise it's all over.
Yeah, I think it's worth talking about, even though I apologize to people who are already aware of these things, because it's just, sort of rubbing their face in it. But I think as somebody who has maybe just heard sort of in a vague sense that global warming is bad, there is a climate crisis, it's easy to not be aware. I mean, you referenced the IPCC reports. I think the most recent one is the 6th report, came out 2023, maybe. Mm-hmm. And in there, what it outlines is like a vision of, to go Schraderian, like revelation. So it's a vision of the acidification of the ocean where the majority of marine species die. And we don't even know what will happen if enough plankton die, because they generate like, 50% of the oxygen on the earth. So we don't have a sense of how it's going to affect things. But yeah, huge swaths of the world become unlivable. Bread baskets, the places that produce most of the consumed agriculture in the world, will just not be able to produce food. So the question is, can we shift our agriculture fast enough, and maybe it will be permanently shifting? So like, can we keep up? Can we keep ahead of the curve of where to be planting things to feed people? And we are talking about billions of deaths. We're talking about, more than, even in the slightly conservative version, the optimistic version where there's 2-degree change, I think there's an anticipation of 1 billion deaths. And if we get to 4-degree change, like the song says, then I think it's maybe like the majority of humans, some estimates say, will not be alive anymore. So I don't know. How do you guys reckon with these types of numbers that are almost incomprehensible, I think.
I mean, I think that's the thing is, like there's part of it that's incredibly despairing. And like those IPCC reports, they talk about the fact that we've already gotten to that like 1 degree Celsius, and they've cautioned and said if we get to 1.5, it's basically game over and we're on like a sort of irrevocable path towards that ascent all the way up into like 3, 4, maybe even 5 degrees Celsius range. So we're close and we're not really doing much to stop it. And, even with like a, quote unquote, like very progressive president like Joe Biden. And I know that, I say that, firmly with tongue in cheek, the response is insufficient, and some of it is so maddening too, because you see the ways in which the decision making is informed by the numbers that the IPCC has stated, but it's, ratcheted back just a little bit to be that kind of like classic neoliberal, like compromise or like means tested, like approval thing. But the thing that drives me most nuts about it is that like these are broadly, overwhelmingly popular reforms and policy agendas. This like Green New Deal, that AOC and Ed Markey introduced back in 2019, that like the only thing really missing is the like concerted political will to do anything about it. And that to me is the thing that I think is like, it can drive one to terrible, terrible thoughts.
Well, this is where the conversation about making rich people's lives unlivable comes in, because like the reason there isn't political will is because all of these people are comfortable and make billions of dollars off of jacking each other off. Right. Yep. So like there's no motivation for any of the people in power to do anything than be deferent to corporations and individuals that are destroying the planet. Mm-hmm. And then, sort of narrativize it in a way that makes the rest of us sort of feel okay about it for the rest of the time, right? That's like what these people are good for at this point. The way that I reckon with it, Ian, is first and foremost by not having kids. Mm-hmm. And like, that's funny, but like also that is like one of the things where I'm like, it's not palliative per se for me, but it does feel like something, knowing that I'm not, giving birth to a daughter who won't have breathable air when she's 50 or whatever the fuck it is. Like, already, I think getting old in America is just a dire exercise. And that's without people in San Francisco a couple years ago. Elderly people died in their apartments because it got so hot in San Francisco, right? Yes.
As resourced a place as you can imagine, basically.
And like the nothingest weather here, like, a 10-degree change up or down between like winter and summer on any given season. So it's just like, that is one thing that I can do. And I then channel the energy that I might be putting into, some toddler whose life is going to get cut short into like the people that I know and love now. And that feels like a way to reckon with it. And we can talk about what the movie has to say about that. And there are like nihilistic impulses that I have, that Toller is an alcoholic and he is a person who is much like planet Earth, decaying, rotting. Mm-hmm. He's this necrotic man. Mm-hmm. And just, full of toxic sludge. Like his stomach is uninhabitable at this point. Like he can't eat anything other than, whiskey soaked bread. So like, I think that nihilism, that impulse is there, we know, in Toller before he even becomes galvanized by something that gives that nihilism meaning. And I think it's really important that he lost a son in the Iraq War, also part of the imperial project that is destroying the planet. And I don't know that Schrader is making that connection, but we certainly are, right? Mm-hmm. And he's, staring at a man who is saying, like, I don't want to bring a child into this world. And he's, Toller is offering him these sort of crumbs of wisdom and maybe some advice and some way to make meaning of it. But I think coming from a man who's lost a child in the way that Toller has, like, I was thinking during their conversation, then throughout the course of the film, watching him destroy himself, you've been Michael since before you even had this realization to crystallize
100%.
it, right? Like,
Yep.
you've been this man who did not understand and couldn't make meaning of the scope of the atrocity that is the American Imperial Project. And he's not necessarily thinking about it in those terms, but I think that it's important that, like, we are able to make that connection and see that Toller is Michael already. And he is a person who is completely confounded by the evil that he has had to make sense of. And Michael is the first person that makes sense to him, even when he is embattled in theological discourse with him. And similarly, the only time for me, and I think this is purposeful, that any conversation about something from like a theological seed or idea that makes sense or doesn't feel hollow and cheap, the only time that something born out of that makes sense to me and feels revelatory is when Toller is in the office of Cedric the Entertainer.
Yep.
Sorry, what's his character's name?
It's Joel.
Oh yeah,
something.
which also felt intentional for our
So
megachurch
completely
fans.
intentional.
Right.
Yeah, Joel
Jeffers.
Yeah.
Played wonderfully by Cedric the Entertainer.
Yes.
Like, really phenomenal performance. It's toward the end of the film. Jeffers is talking with Toller and he's saying, like, we're worried about you, you know, are you okay? And also, like, cut the shit.
You're in the garden, as he says
You're
a
in
lot.
the garden.
Right.
You're always
Yes.
in the garden. For Christ, it wasn't always, you know, about darkness and death and sacrifice. And that's what Jeffers is telling Toller. And Toller asks him at one point, he's like, shouldn't we look upon everything that God has created with reverence? Shouldn't we hold these things as precious? Shouldn't we, like, seek to care for and love and preserve life that God gave us the way that, you know, the way that we're supposed to, according to these texts? And then, like, it's summarily dismissed. But that's like the one time where I'm like, that feels like something, you know?
Yeah, I think Schrader shows his theological acumen there because he demonstrates, and I think throughout the film, you're absolutely right, Carlee, that most of the gestures, even when Toller is quoting from scripture, are sort of like, well, has this convinced anybody? Has this helped anybody? We get the little youth group moment where a girl is sort of reckoning with, like, hey, she basically restates, like, the problem of evil of, like, hey, my dad got laid off. How is that possible? And Toller tries to start to use scripture in a meaningful way, like he does at the end here. And I think Schrader demonstrates that as helpful as something like the Bible could be in opening people's eyes to this type of stuff, there's just as many bad actors, or maybe more bad actors, who are going to use it to either offer platitudes or to straight up argue for the reasons that we should seek wealth or success in the name of God or something. So I think his stance is kind of like value neutral in the end of, like, these texts do have some wisdom in them, but the way that they're used means it's kind of a wash. Unless you're already on the path, unless you've already been Michael radicalized or somebody else is helping you see what's important in there, then you're going to end up taking the wrong message. But I like what you said, Carlee, in terms of Toller already being in a place of despair, but I think there's some really nice moments where he talks about his frustration with his own pettiness and, like, his focus on his ailments as kind of like selfish existentialism. And I think there's a beautiful growth that I would imagine all three of us share. I know, Jake, I'm going to speak for him here with confidence that there is an evolution from just being focused on your own depression, sort of like inward looking, and then realizing how it relates to the world around you. And is there a way to not set aside the despair or to become this, like, Pollyannish person who's going to ignore suffering or ignore your own anguish, but become somebody who makes that actionable, who turns that into a way to interact with other people or motivate empathy or motivate radical political action, whatever it's going to be. But I think that the film is sort of struggling with like, all right, if you're put up against this force, because I think you're right, that the conversation, Toller seems so pathetic for most of it with Michael, where he's saying like, look, you can't just be down in the dumps all the time, dude. You know, it's good to be hopeful. And it's ridiculous because he's also...
pass it on.
Exactly. But it's funny because we know he's the same guy who said, I lost my son in Iraq, a war that had no purpose, and I was the one who sent him there. So mostly he just hasn't figured out a way to sort of like express that in the world or turn it into something useful. And I think the film is asking, well, what does that look like? And then maybe the end, I think you're right to bring up the end, discusses maybe two ways that you can make that useful. And I don't know if the film prioritizes one or the other. We can talk about what you guys think the film is trying to say. I have some Schrader quotes that Jake found in an article about what he thinks is in the end, but it's sort of the classically discussed part of the film because it is on the surface kind of ambiguous about what happens. So do you guys want to talk about it? Your feelings? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the dialectic that you're espousing there, Ian, is part of what's rectified by the end, you know, and synthesized into a new way of understanding. I guess it's multifaceted because what it is ultimately is there is the sort of individuated despair and nihilism of refusing to live and rejecting life because of your knowledge of the horrors of it. And, you know, those here are obviously detailed in climate anxiety, but in other Schrader films, they're present as well, right? And they're more ambient and I think a little bit less specified, but it's the same, I think, in Schrader's eyes. It's still something that is sort of egotistically rejecting life and existing in it and sharing it and embracing it with other people because of your own fears and despair. The church doesn't offer the answer either, though. The church is equally nihilistic in its endeavors as well. Like you know, Jeffers in that conversation, you know, in the garden scene, we'll call it, says something that's like, you know, maybe it's God's will for all this shit to just get totally destroyed by, you know, our arrogant meddling and fracking and polluting and you name it, right? Deforestation. And that to me is an equally nefarious and horrible kind of perspective, right? Like we're powerless in the eyes of God and maybe he wants us to just, you know, continue on this path of destruction. So by the end, I think that it's, you know, I think it's very beautiful. I think it's very profound, but it's certainly not entirely novel within the realm of Schrader's cinema, which is just sort of like, can you, as we've already talked about in the conversation with Michael, can you hold these two contradictory truths at once? Can you know that there's doom ahead, that there is sort of an impending crisis and an apocalypse, and can you also still exist in this world? And can you do so with the capacity for love? And can you do that with the capacity to still engage with your fellow man, to share life with those people, to embrace one another, and to try to find some sort of meaning in it, even when it all feels meaningless?
I think that's beautifully put. I mean, to me, the question is sort of, because the film is talking about uncertainty about the future, is there an approach to life, a perspective, a philosophy, or whatever that would make sense if the world lasts 10 more years or if it lasts thousands of years more? Is there something that is sort of like bulletproof regardless of what the scenario is? And I think, to me, the conclusion of the film, again, just to remind the listeners, where Toller is going to go suicide vest all the people at this reconsecration, specifically Bulk, this industrial polluter, and then realizes that Amanda Seyfried, the widow, despite his pleas to not go to this reconsecration, she shows up and he freaks out and realizes, okay, I can't blow everybody up. So I'm just going to kill myself. Instead, I'm going to wrap myself in barbed wire and drink drain cleaner. And then she bursts in on him just when he's about to do it. And there's a sort of, as Schrader puts it in this Vulture article that Jake found, says, it's calibrated to be read in different ways, Schrader said, because when you look at it closely, she suddenly appears. The room is much lighter. The footsteps go away. So I was trying to find the right balance between it being a kind of intervention of grace, a kind of miracle, or an ecstatic vision, which is also a kind of miracle, I guess. So in the case of an ecstatic vision, we could say that's closer to the sort of like, is this a dream? Is this just a vision of somebody who is going to commit suicide or is going to blow people up? Or is it an actual experience? In either case, I think the cool thing about the ending to me, we don't have to be sort of like boring film fans who decide on what the actual thing that happens is. I think none of us are that type of film goer. But the point is, in the face of this, how do you find Schraderian grace? We've seen it in Light Sleeper. We've seen it in maybe in Taxi Driver. We've seen it in many of these films. How do you find somebody who is going to remind you what the point of being alive is, but not in a selfish way? I think that's the key thing. We also have this character of Esther, who is, again, the inherited character of Marta from Winter Light, who maybe Toller is a bit hard on in some ways, but
a little bit.
Yeah. Some of the phrases that I think he calls her a stumbling block, which is one of the meanest things you can say to a human being.
and repeats, I despise you.
Yes.
And it's just like, oh my God, it's brutal.
Yeah.
Brutal.
It is brutal. But I think if we can be generous to him, there's an argument, there's versions of love which are totally like unchallenging, selfish versions that just kind of like reward small thinking. And it doesn't mean that you have to totally dehumanize people and talk to them the way Toller does. But I think the reason that maybe Mary represents something different is because she's also aware of the climate crisis. She's not some like totally naive person who doesn't care about the future. She, throughout the film, reiterates, I care about all this same stuff. I guess I'm just more hopeful than Michael is, or I guess, but she's an activist. It's not like she's just sitting back and waiting for this stuff to change. She's out there, but she's also trying to find human connection and care and go on the magical mystery tour of the world. So I think the question is sort of like, can you find that? Can you strike that balance? Which I think is a gorgeous challenge to all the viewers of any film.
I think there's no better literalization of holding two contradictory things inside of you than being wrapped in barbed wire while you are making out with a woman that you love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that, sort of concretizes that concept to a certain extent. And I think it's like, and I don't know that Schrader is necessarily advocating for self-flagellation, but I think he is acknowledging and he understands, we know this about him, the impulse to self-flagellate in the face of despair, in the face of pain, and even in the face of grace sometimes.
The affliction impulse, we could call it
the
also.
The affliction impulse, yes, absolutely. And so I like that the film ends on that literalization. And I think it's a beautiful, beautiful scene. And uncharacteristically of me, I refuse to let myself think about it too much.
Interesting.
Because I am like a person who, like, my pedantry is one of my like least becoming traits. And like when it comes to films, like my question asking and like the picking apart of things like is a habit of mine that, I sometimes try to keep at bay, and sometimes directors do it for me. And Schrader is someone who does a really good job of that, where like he suspends all of those impulses in me and allows me to just kind of like take his movies in. And with that ending, like we're in a film by another filmmaker and maybe like handled a little bit differently, and had he made different formal decisions and whatever, I might want to spend more time thinking about it. And I never do. I just like sort of feeling it and then being like, I think I maybe think that it's, and then I go like, nope, not gonna do that. But I do agree with both of you. I tend to lean towards this notion that it's sort of offering something that Toller hasn't been able to do for the entirety of the film, which is a little bit of an answer about, how to make sense of it and what to do, and that it is about loving other people. I also, I feel like the ending is special to the two moments in the film that feel not just transcendental, but feel like these sort of surrealist exercises are the ending and the Magical Mystery Tour.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think about them in concert when I'm watching either of them.
Yeah.
And, you don't know that the first time you're watching the film, but on these rewatches, they just feel like these like nice little like sparkly magical moments. And he has other elements that are, sort of bend toward surrealist impulses and kind of lift you up out of like how terrestrial a lot of what he's doing is, despite the formal decisions he's making. But those moments together, I really like as a conversation, because in both moments, they're face to face. They're looking at each other with open eyes and then closing their eyes and breathing together and embracing. And I think that's like not just what you have to do with people in your life, and also that you've like never met before, like just sort of like as a concept, like understand love for humans that you don't come into contact with. But I also like that that's kind of like this embrace too of like the catastrophe of the whole thing, where it's like both of them are kind of like letting the feelings of overwhelm take them over and like be consumed by it, but also like experience it together. And that feels meaningful and nice.
I think that's exactly right, Carlee. Schrader, first of all, says that he included in part the Magical Mystery Tour scene to set up the ending, to sort of teach the viewer that like this is the type of film you're watching, even though up until this point, you might not have known that. You might have thought that it was a different type of ending. And this is the ending that is also called the Ordette ending, because at the end of the Dreyer film Ordette, which is sort of a like what you're describing, a more realistic investigation of this little town, and there's a son who's maybe he thinks he's Jesus and can do miracles, but is kind of like also maybe mentally disabled and doesn't know what he's talking about. And then at the end of the film, a character dies, and they ask that son to resurrect the character, and he does. He just straight up after an entire film where there's no hint of any kind of supernatural or surreal activity or anything, he just resurrects the character, and it's a totally ecstatic moment, I think, in film viewing. So just, well, like you're saying, it's something that is just meant to be experienced rather than discussed as like, well, what does this say about our lives exactly? So I think you put that so excellently. I just was straight up crying in the Magical Mystery Tour scene this time. Don't remember if I did that last time, but I was just crying this time. So
it's so emotional.
It's overwhelming. It's like, I mean, it really is beautiful, and I'm glad it's there to set up the sort of spiritual catharsis of the end of the film. But yeah, when it happens, nothing prepares you for it ahead of time, and I think that makes it all the more just like revelatory in the context. And yeah, I mean, it's just incredibly moving without saying anything at all.
Yeah, I mean, we could say that the action of the scene is like their noses brushing together, which you see a few times. And that's while we're also witnessing, I don't know what it is, but behind them, the Himalayas or something, whatever is being projected is so gorgeously. But yeah, I think, that is the emotional climax of the film. Is there anything else that you guys just admire about the movie as a movie? I mean, Jake referenced how many allusions there are to other Schrader works. It's almost insane to have done this podcast, because you can see like Forever Mind shots, and there's a Mishima moment where he talks about how exercise is God given. It's
Yes.
riding a bike.
Right.
Makes you strong and frees your brain spiritually. And there's just like an endless list, light sleeper style cafeteria conversation with your ex-wife or whatever, close to ex-wife. But anything else that in the film you just enjoy as a bit of filmmaking that is worth commenting on?
I will just say this isn't necessarily filmmaking, but I do feel you know more about this, Ian, than I do. I love the performances that Schrader got out of his actors.
Oh man, yeah.
And I don't know what conversations he's having with them, and I'm curious to know what you'd have to say about that, because like, I mean, I love Schrader's writing, and I like sometimes that it feels totally batshit and like incredibly literary, and you're just like, I hear you writing these words and it doesn't matter. Like I still love the experience of watching actors perform his screenwriting. With Ethan Hawke, like there's just something about his delivery, and maybe the fact that he's a priest, so the words maybe feel less like, I don't know, strange, but this role felt so perfect for him. He just embodies it. And I don't know what Schrader is doing with his actors, but Amanda Seyfried, I've never liked her more, even though she's like not doing a ton, but she's doing enough of what you need her to. The actor who plays Michael, like everyone is so good in this. And Ethan Hawke in particular, he just like really let his voice be like gravelly, and like he's intent, and he's got that stare. He's like looking underneath his brow the entire film and then raising his eyebrows when he needs to. And it's just like, it's incredible. What does Schrader do with his actors generally?
Look, I think you're right to point all this stuff out. I totally agree with everything that you said, including Ethan Hawke, of course, shines tremendously in this film. And I keep saying Seyfried too, but I think it's Seyfried, but I just grew up saying the wrong thing.
No, it is.
So,
it is
whatever.
that. I said it wrong.
No. I just call her Amanda because she's my friend. So
it's really nice for you guys. Yeah, I think it's funny, Carlee, because you're exactly right. This is not the first film where we get that Schraderian dialogue that is so heavily literary, feels like Eric Romer or something, where there's like two people in a room talking about Pascal, and that's okay, even though nobody does that quite that same way in real life. In terms of his actor preparation, I think we know that Schrader likes to bring in strong voices and let those people cook, as the kids say, right? So, if you look at something like Comfort of Strangers, where he's bringing in Walken, who's really going to do Walken for his lines. And I think that's one of the reasons that film works so well, where I think with a different actor, the same directing style, it could totally fall flat. And to be frank, or to be fair, sometimes in Schrader films, it doesn't totally align, and the cutting's too fast, and there's too much other stuff going on, and it does fall flat. So I think for me, it's also a question of finally employing transcendental style and allowing these actors, allowing somebody like Ethan Hawke to just embody the role, and then forcing us to sort of like watch it in context, not have it be kind of a fast moving conversation, like not to pick on it, but something like The Walker, or even a film that I like, like Light Sleeper. I don't know. It's just like so much more modest in its ability to let these actors stand on their own in a single dark room that is like, framed by almost no light, and just say, okay, just read this like it's the thing that is maybe going to drive you to suicide. And we're just going to watch you feel that. And of course, part of that is just the quality of the acting. But having just seen something like Dying of the Light, where Schrader dialogue can be a total dud when taken up by incompetent editors and incompetent producers and shot in the wrong way. So I think it is part of him working with his actors, but I also think it's the right shooting style, with the right editing style, with the right lighting. But Aaron, you've seen plenty of Schrader films. What do you think?
I agree with everything that you have said.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that everyone in this is really phenomenal, and I think that you're right that it's just like allowing that room to breathe and finally kind of adopting that transcendental style to it. I will say one thing, you know, if we're on the question of stuff that we want to emphasize in the movie that we enjoy, this is a very like minor thing, but the scene where Toller finds Michael in the park and the like blood-strewn snow, and we see, you know, the top of his head, you know, like sheared off by the bullet, is, you know, austere in its sort of composition, but also just like mortifying, just like absolutely horrific. And I kind of applaud Schrader for it, you know. I mean, not that I'm like, you know, eager to see, you know, brains splattered or around in a film and have that done in a way that's very visceral and like realistic. But rewatching Winter Light, and maybe you watched it recently too, Ian, but the scene where, after spoilers, Max von Sydow's character has taken his life and Gunnar Bjornstrand like goes down to like the river bank where his body is laid, the way that von Sydow has like manipulated and shaped his body and contorted it is so terrifying without there being any sort of like viscera or blood. It's like, it's astonishing how disturbing it is, just like the way that he's laid. And I just like the sort of dichotomy of those two things, both of them being incredibly visceral and horrific, but in very distinct ways. One more slightly, you know, conservative in terms of its approach, obviously, when you're working in black and white and in 1963, and one that is like, let's just go all the way in that direction and show you like, you know, like you can really see like all the way into his skull. So I don't know. I think both are incredibly effective and like very astonishing sequences in both of their respective films.
Yeah, in case people don't remember, we get a classic transcendental style setup of watching Toller walk through the woods for like much longer than you would in a conventional film. And then he comes upon this body, and it is a little bit more like Winter Light, where Michael's folded in a slightly weird way, not on the Max von Sydow sort of expert level, but you can already see half of his skull, and you're sort of like, is he missing the top of his skull? It's already a grisly shot. Then Schrader cuts to a much grislier shot, straight on, like you're saying, looking down on his skull. And man, is it powerful. And it's the kind of patience where we got that he was dead. There was no doubt about him being dead. So this is just about manipulating in a positive way audience feeling, or forcing them to have the Toller experience of not just finding Michael dead, but finding him dead in really just like horrific clarity for himself. And what's that going to do to him? How's that going to change? You know, I think seeing somebody with the top of their head blown off might allow you to stand up to a guy who's kind of bullying you in a local Denny's, because you maybe don't care so much about that anymore. You're not that embarrassed about saying, hey, you know what? I think you might be poisoning the earth that we're on, because I just saw a guy who was dead. So it's fine for me to humiliate myself a little bit in public now.
Right, you are.
I love, by the way, how close we are in on that shot of all of them in the booth, where we're just like
it's so
in the conversation with them, and how like uncomfortable and like fucked up it is. Like, it's great. It's that scene is that guy just like insanely hateable, the guy that plays Ed Polk. Like,
yeah, I mean, he
in
really
a way
is.
that like I can't really put words
What
to.
did we say his name is? Michael Gaston.
Yep.
The dog killer.
The dog killer.
That's right. Yeah, I don't think there's a bad performance in this film, top to bottom. I think pretty much everybody, you know, Esther has a hard role, but she pulls it off very well, where you do feel that she loves this guy despite how poorly he treats her and what their past is like. And like you said, the Joel Jeffords character, the film without him, I think creates a contrast between moral priest struggling with all these issues and, you know, big time villain in the form of Balk. But now we have this guy in the middle who's kind interpersonally, but also is facilitating some of the worst stuff that you could imagine in the globe, and is maybe more concerned with keeping the machine running than anything else. So,
Yes.
Yeah, it's an incredible film. I'm going to give my stamp of approval on it. And we do have one more segment in the show, which unfortunately I'm not Jake, so I don't have the soundboard available. But Paul Schrader, in presenting Patty Hearst a few years ago and talking about his upcoming film, Non Compos Mentis, had this to say.
I've never written a script about sexual obsession, and so that's the one I'm doing now.
Now, my question for you guys is, has Paul Schrader written a film that's not about sexual obsession? We have decided that there probably are more than a few. Is this film about sexual obsession? What do we think, yay or nay?
Good question.
I think it's a really good question. I think, remarkably, this film may not be totally about sexual obsession. I think that there is certainly a romantic and sexual desire in the film that is illuminated in Toller's relationship with Mary, but I don't think that the film overemphasizes it to the point of it being so distinctly and specifically a sexual desire that is being gratified or pursued within the movie. That's my take on it.
I think that's right. I think the fact that her name is Mary, I think the fact that she's pregnant.
Right. Has almost a virginal quality to her.
She's draped, in white in that magical mystery sequence. Yeah, I think there's a lot that they do to actively desexualize Amanda physically in the movie and the way that she's shot and kind of how she stands. And I think that Toller obviously recognizes, that she's beautiful and that she represents something that he maybe wants or ideas that he's interested in, inspired by. But I think his obsession with her is more around grace than it is necessarily around, a pure sexual obsession. But we know that those two things can exist quite harmoniously. So
they certainly can. I agree with you guys. We've talked about how maybe one of the challenges for Schrader, maybe one of the reasons he would make the insane claim that he's never written a film about sexual obsession is because he has a starker division in his mind between what is sexual and what is like romantic grace style. Because I would say that this film is intensely chaste up until the end, but it is also highly romantic. I mean, the Magical Mystery Tour moment is so intimate without being exactly sexually gratifying. Is like as intimate as romance gets, basically, in some ways. Just having the vulnerability of pressing your body against somebody else's body and hearing your breathing, etc. So I think you guys are right. I don't think this film is about sexual obsession, but we have to check,
Gotta check.
Jake
question.
also messaged us his answer. I don't know if anyone else saw it, but he says,
of course he did.
My answer is no, but that the film helpfully suggests human connection as a kind of wire brush that scrapes the black gunk off the soul's barbecue so that we can keep using it to grill energy executives alive and feed them to our friends, the wolves and bears and mountain lions, etc. Also, R.I.P. P22 should have been Mayor Eric Garcetti instead.
Thank you so much, Jake. Gone but not forgotten. I will say, beautiful barbecue metaphor. Jake also can't talk about sex without talking about the word gunk. So that's I think the signature fashion on his part.
All the hits are there.
Yep. I think he's right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. We of course had to have you for this, what is maybe sort of the pinnacle of our season, talking about Schrader. We wouldn't trust anybody else to do such a wonderful job. Can you guys plug your podcast and anything else you are working on?
Absolutely. And thank you for saying so, Ian. I think when we were talking about coming on the program and Jake was like, what Schrader would you want to talk about? I said, if you don't let us talk about First Reformed, Carlee will find you and physically harm you. And I'm not suggesting that we...
In the form of a barbed wire hug.
Exactly.
Right.
Like there would be some like loving energy that I would bring to the altercation.
And it is a favorite Schrader, and just like one of our favorite movies, one that Carlee and I, bonded over, both just loving immensely. And I can't necessarily say that we have done better on this program than would maybe a climate scientist or, somebody who reports on this kind of stuff regularly. But I will say that we probably had more fun than they would have had on the show because
And
it's
I'm
always
an
a
expert
pleasure.
on not having babies.
That's true.
So-
We are
Yeah,
experts in our own right.
I'm the
So,
only person you guys could talk to about that.
That's very true.
Correct.
Carly's very into not having babies.
Yeah, I think the key here is not just to bring on an expert, it's to bring on some people who have struggled with this in the way that Toller has. And I think you're some of the best people to have ever struggled with it.
Yeah, if you're looking for people who have struggled, my friend, yeah,
Big time
struggle.
Huge, in a huge way.
In a huge way. By any means, the name of the show is Hit Factory. We are a podcast about the films of the 1990s and their politics, how they inform the film landscape of today, etc. You can listen to us wherever you stream your podcasts. And we have a Patreon for the show as well, patreon.com/hitfactorypod, where we do our bi-weekly bonus episodes and occasionally some other bonus content there as well. And subscribing there also gets you invited to the Hit Factory Discord, which Jake is a frequent member of. And Ian, I believe you've been invited, but Discord is just one more platform that, you would have to deal with. And I know that that's not your speed.
It's too many places.
Too many places.
So kind of you guys. Thank you. Yes.
But it's a fun community where we always get together and chat, and there's a lot of friends of the show. There are friends of Podcasty in there as well, and some previous guests of your program. So go and visit there and join us, and we look forward to meeting you.
The Discord, I get it a lot of it secondhand from Jake. Wonderful place to talk about film. And of course, we've been on your podcast, hoping to return in the future. Talked about Austin Powers, talked about Carlo Diario, wonderful films, but really picking episodes, guys. Hit Factory is just one of the best podcasts that there is about film, politics, being alive in this grim moment that we all occupy together. So thank you guys so much for coming on.
Thanks for having us. The one other thing I will plug is that I don't listen to podcasts because I hate them. And the only podcast that I listen to is Podcasty for Me.
Wow, that is so nice. Deranged, but very kind.
Yeah, it's maybe a little nuts, but it is reality.
In case our good friend and guest of both of our programs, Jesse Hawken, is listening, Carlee also listens to Junk Filter on occasion.
I also listen to Junk Filter. I also occasionally listen to Chapo Trap House, but, Podcasty is the one that is the most consistent. I fall asleep to you guys, so... make of that what you will.
Oh, that's
not
great.
All the time. Not every night.
I have
not every night.
Walked into the bedroom
not every night.
in order to shut off Carlee's phone and get into bed as she is in a slumber in the dream space, listening to the two of you talk about boners or something.
No,
and I know
that's the thing. It's not about boners. I learned so many things. I want all the knowledge in my brain, and
it's both.
It's gotta be both, unfortunately. In fairness and proper critique to us. Yeah, I think maybe the dream space is the place where this works the best. So give it a try, guys. Throw it on while you're sleeping. Maybe you find you like it better. All right. Thank you so much. Jake's going to take us away here, read his little spiel. I don't have access to the special rate, like, and subscribe, do all that good stuff, but he'll talk to us about it. And look, we still have 2 more of this trilogy to go. So obviously stick around. And then we have O Canada coming up. We're all excited to see. I think it's going to be a big experience, big Schraderian modern experience. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.
All right, guys, I'm back. Guys, did you guys leave? This gives me an idea. Abracadabra, listeners, and welcome to Now You Hear Me, the premier podcast devoted to the Now You See Me franchise of films. I'm your host, J. Daniel Serwin. And this week, we've got a very exciting show for you. Just yesterday, star Jesse Eisenberg teased some exciting news about next year's long-awaited Now You See Me 3 while promoting his new film, A Real Pain, at the BFI London Film Festival.